Hey guys, welcome to Green Bean Fiction. So in today's video we are gonna see, what if Deku became Dark Knight with Harem, Part 1. Before starting, make sure to hit that like button and subscribe if you are interested in MHA fanfictions. This story is MHA Reacts to the Batman by Dragon Godeyes 113. Now without wasting any more time, let's dive in. The students of UA were all very excited for next week as it is the final for the hero classes, though the students of both Class 1A and Class 1B were the most excited, though this did include several of the teachers of UA. And a few pro heroes were also excited to see how their students will perform, especially Nezu, as with how he had changed the final with the help and advice of Izuku. You could say that this is the most excited that Nezu has been in years, and Izuku is very excited but also nervous if he will be able to prove to himself that even without All Might's quirk he could have still become a hero. He could have become the first quirkless pro hero. Though suddenly several members of Class 1A, a few of 1B, pro heroes, and finally Kota were teleported into a theater. What the hell? Where are we? Show yourself, villain. Were some of the things that were shouted by the people who were teleported into a theater, and the room that they had found themselves in was very foreign. Then the TV turned on. I have teleported you because there is some information about one Izuku Midoriya that I think you will find very interesting, and also things that have yet to happen. Sit down if you are interested. Wait, really? Kota said with stars in his eyes of the face that he could see more about his hero, and even if Izuku was a hero in training, he was still his favorite hero. Yes, really, young Kota, now if you will be kind enough to sit down, and also before you complain, Bakugo, you will not be able to escape until you are done with what I have to show you. Bakugo closed his mouth as he was about to start yelling, but his face shifted into a very deep scowl. Well, as we are stuck here, it is only logical we watch this, Aizawa said in his usual lazy tone. Well, it couldn't hurt to do this, especially since from the sounds of it we are going to be stuck here until we finish watching this, All Might said, though mentally wondering what they were going to be shown about his favorite student. Eraserhead, marry me, Miss Joke suddenly shouted as she lunged at Aizawa and ended up pushing him deeper into the chair he sat on. No, now get off me, Emmy, he said with a sigh. Multiple of his students looked at their teacher, rejecting this pro-heroine like it was just another day at the office. Is this normal? Shoto decided to ask. Yes, was the simultaneous response from all of the UA teachers. The people who were teleported included Kota Ryukyu aka Ryuko Tatsuma, Mirko aka Rumi Usagiyama, Eraserhead aka Shota Aizawa, Present Mike aka Hazashi Yamada, Cementos aka Ken Ishiyama, Nezu the principal of the UA Midnight aka Namori Kayama, Miss Joke aka Emi Fukukado, Recovery Girl aka Chio Shuzenji, All Might aka Toshinori Yagi, Gran Torino aka Sorihiko Torino, Kendo Itsuka, hero name, Battle Fist Nato Monoma, hero name, Phantom Thief Shoto Todoroki, hero name, Shoto, Tenya Iida, hero name, Ingenium Ajiro Kirishima, hero name, Red Riot Minoru Mineta, hero name, Grape Juice, Denki Kaminari, hero name, Chargebolt Katsuki Bakugo, hero name. Explosion inside the classroom. 1A was as chaotic as usual, with the class all divided up into their own groups. The Bakugo squad that was on one side being loud, while in the back were the quieter kids like Shoji and Tokiyami. Meanwhile, on the opposite side of the Baku squad, the Deku squad were speaking to each other, except for the very person who gave it its namesake. Deku, more well known as Izuku Midoriya, was sitting quietly alone in his seat. The members of said group couldn't help but have a small frown slightly grace their faces at this. Why would Deku be alone? Ochako couldn't but voice her thoughts. If you shut up we will find out, Pink Cheeks. Bakuago shouted at her, angry and irritated at her asking something they probably will find out very soon, and that he is forced to react to Deku. The boy was in deep thought and contemplation about what had happened not that long ago. It had barely been a few minutes ago, and yet his brain was still on overdrive from what occurred. Why, you may ask? Well, that's because the topic of Aizawa's class earlier was on the quirkless, so yeah, this was an extremely sore subject for the Greenette. Why are the quirkless population of people a sore subject for Midoriya? Iida voiced out his confusion, as many of classes 1A and B were equally confused at this. All Might sighed, knowing he had to bend the truth enough so they wouldn't find out about one for all, but enough truth so they will know a bit of what happened. Young Midoriya was misdiagnosed as quirkless when he was 4 years old, and due to that he had to live like he was actually quirkless. All Might explained to his students as their eyes widened in shock and sadness at what he most likely had to go through. However, that's not all. The things that happened he read and the things he heard in the hour-long lesson had shaken him. Flashback about an hour ago. Izuku was minding his business writing notes on a quirk he found interesting while waiting for Aizawa to home into the classroom. If an ice user like this could mold the H2O in the air with support gear like this that amplifies the emitting energy from the hands, could theoretically form weapons and walls, if not like Todoroki in power but on a smaller and maybe faster scale. HMPH nerd. Bakago scoffed at this as his muttering annoyed him, though his friends had amused eye rolls at this with how amusing his mutterings could be. Those near the boy quirked an eyebrow but turned back to what they were doing, but no longer than 5 minutes later their homeless-looking teacher arrived and spoke. Aizawa felt a tick mark grow on his forehead as he heard how he was described and how his other students most likely thought about him like that, and even heard more than one person repressing an amused snort at how he was described. Alright, settle down brats. Today's lesson will be on a new subject that shouldn't take longer than a week. Everyone sat and listened, and when he saw they were all sat down and paying attention, Aizawa said, "The subject will be the quirkless population and the aspects of their role in society." With that said, the class digested this and saw Aizawa's mouth move and continue speaking. Now open up your textbooks and read through pages 126 and 129. The class did as told and opened the book. Izuku thought doing his assigned tasks on the inside was not doing all right due to his past. Oh no, hopefully this goes well. Something tells me this won't go well, Momo muttered mostly to herself, though the people around her heard her loud and clear and couldn't help but agree, those being Juru, Ryuku, and Mariko. Back to present. The class after that was numbing, to say the least. For Izuku it was like a slap to the face that unfortunately infuriated him to the point his knuckles turned white. All Might felt a small frown on his mouth seeing how the lesson had affected him, as this was far from good. Dekukan, Midoriya, were some of the worried thoughts of his friends. Even now, when the class was already over, his hands were still clenched. The things that were said and what he read were blatant lies and utter bullshit. The textbook had outdated information. From what he could tell was at least 20 years old, and the statistics were all wrong. For instance, the suicide rate that was written was said to be 40%, but nowadays it has upped to 85%, a whole whopping 45% off. Nezu had to suppress a snarl at this. The one thing that he hated the most was when information was blatantly wrong or purposely misleading for students who were trying to learn. But it didn't stop there, as the book said the treatment wasn't good with a little bit of bullying. Again, it was a damn lie, as most if not all quirkless people were bullied to the point there were multiple forums with quirkless people talking about their problems, all stating they went through the same terrible treatment. Is it that bad? Momo asked worriedly. Yes, even back in the days when I was growing up it was horrible, but nowadays when you are quirkless it is like going through a literal living hell, if not much worse. Young Yaoyorozu, All Might spoke. It wasn't just the textbooks though, but the class itself. Many of Izuku's friends didn't know enough to see the lies, and when asked questions were utterly off from reality. Hearing this, most of the pro-heroes frowned, not liking that the books were so far off from reality. One question struck him hard when Aizawa asked the class about the possibility of someone quirkless pursuing the job of a professional hero, and the one to answer this was Kaminari Denki. I don't think so. I mean, what could they do in a fight? I think they'd hurt themselves and just put others in danger, said the blonde boy. To hear this shook Izuku, and when he heard the comments from his other classmates just drove it home to him. They all agreed to Denki's words and some added to it. I must agree. It wouldn't be logical for them to become heroes, as it would only lead them needing to be protected by others, said Tenya Iida. The words from one of his best friends hurt more than he cared to admit, but he didn't speak about it. He simply sat there and went through the rest of the class until it was finished. Iida looked down in shame at what he said. Don't worry, Iida-kun, you didn't know, Ochako said, trying to confront him, which Iida responded with a smile to one of his best friends. And that's what brought us to our current predicament of Izuku sitting alone festering in his anger. He simply didn't know what to do or who to talk to about this. All Might had the authority and first-hand experience, so he could relate, but the more he thought about explaining his past to his mentor, the more he hesitated, and he came up with an idea. All Might looked down at this. You could come to me with anything, young Midoriya, All Might thought to himself with a small frown on his face. Maybe I could speak to Nezu about this. That statement clicked with him, and with that thought Izuku made the plan to speak to the principal later that day. Why do I have a feeling that something very chaotic will happen? Kaminari asked mostly to himself. Because that is probably what will happen, Mina admitted, getting many nods around. Time skip after school. The successor of the #1 hero was now at the door to the principal's office, and he was about to knock but was stopped when he heard a cheery voice. Some could hear some grumbling coming from Bakugou that was filled with jealousy and saying how he will kill the nerd, making a few around the explosive blonde chuckle in amusement. Come in. He blinked at this but opened the door, peeking his head through. Hello Principal Nezu sir. I would like to speak with you if it's not an inconvenience to you. The rat, bear thing chucked and nodded at the boy. That would be stellar young Midoriya. Come in, come in. With consent he entered the room and sat in a chair that he was gestured to. He sat and felt the extremity soft seat but focused back on the taste at hand. Sir, I'd like to speak with you about something that came to my attention in today's lesson. It's a rather sore subject to me, but it's also very important, said a now serious yet still stuttering Greenette. Nezu inwardly raised an amused eyebrow but replied, Sure thing my boy. Now if I remember right, today's class would be on the quirkless, am I correct? Izuku nodded and from there went into detail about what they went over from the start to the end, but when he went over the incorrect statistics and the individual students' perspectives, he could see a primal rage in his principal's eyes. Everyone in the theater except for the said rat god flinched when they saw the anger and rage in the principal's eyes, and the pro heroes unfortunate enough to sit near him shifted away from. The principal had clenched his hands around his teacup so hard it cracked, but that wasn't all. His eyes and face, usually cheerful, were now contorted in rage. It seems I have thought too much of certain individuals in the educational system. This mess you have brought to me is very infuriating, to say the least. Spoken now irate Nezu. Izuku blinked but nodded at this but formed a frustrated expression that Nezu saw and spoke about. Izuku, I know you were quirkless before and how much this would have affected you. I just want to tell you that I promised to come up with something to fix this. Dekukan was quirkless. Ochako asked in surprise, as was the entirety of Class 1A and 1B, with the expectation of Bakugo, and even most of the pro-heroes were surprised, though in the side All Might was shifting nervously, and before he could say something stupid Nezu spoke up. Izuku was quirkless until the entrance exam, and he luckily unlocked his quirk on the day of the entrance exam when he saved young Uraraka from the zero-pointer. Nezu explained smoothly. Taking a calming breath, Izuku looked Nezu in the eyes and spoke clearly, I want to take part in this AAND if it's not too much. I may not have the authority to do this, but I'd like to propose an idea. An eerie smirk formed on the rat god's face as he placed his arms on the desk and leaned forward. Oh, and what might this idea be? Most of the pro-heroes couldn't help but also feel curious about what Izuku was planning to do. Izuku took a moment before he explained, I'd like to do a training or social exam of sorts for our final thesis here. It may be months away, but I'd need that time for my part in the exam. Nezu hummed and asked, could you explain more about this? You've piqued my interest greatly and I'd like to see what more you have in mind. What is he planning to do? Shodo couldn't but ask what his first and best friend was planning to do. Just wait and find out, I see hot. Bakugo yelled at him. Nodding quickly, Izuku continued. The idea is that a quirkless person, or in other words, myself, will play a part in the exercise where my skills will be tested for my own final. However, I'm kind of stuck on everything else, and that's where you would come in. That is an interesting idea. Ryuku admitted, getting many nods from the pro-heroes and some from the students. A stretch of silence enveloped the room before chuckling could be heard, which soon became a laugh, then became a full-blown hysterical laughter that scared anyone who was outside the office. After hearing the laughter, the pro-heroes did their best to get as far away from Nezu as possible. Despite this already happening, it didn't stop them from being afraid of his laughter. I shall pray for your safety, Midoriya, Present Mike said, bowing his head to the Greenette. Izuku became terrified and wanted nothing more than to run for the hills, but without fail the laughter stopped abruptly out of nowhere, as it was never there at all, freaking him out even more. Nezu looked upon the boy no genius and thanked him. I must say, my boy, this is going to be the most fun I've had in years. Don't worry, Midoriya, we'll go over the idea and I'll give you full support for your role in the exercise. Nezu should never be excited, Mike muttered to his friends as Midnight and Aizawa couldn't help but nod slowly. And went over the idea they did. It took them a full week, but when it was all ironed out, now all Izuku had to do was get himself ready for his role. He was currently in his dorm room at his desk with his notebook in front of him. His job right now was to come up with everything he needed for his part. There are a couple of aspects I want to work on for this. The first part should be about my body, so training, but the question is what type. He mulled over for a few moments until it hit him. Oh, I'm so stupid. If I was a vigilante or wanted to be one, I'd want to be fully ready for it. That means endurance training, gymnastics, parkour, calisthenics, and of course fighting styles. The greenette wrote this all down before moving on to the next part. Now on to the more mental aspects. I should study biochemistry, chemistry, mechanics. Maybe electroics. Yeah, probably, and forensics and a few more if I got time. Aizawa nodded in approval as this was a very good start. That is a good way to start, Snipe said in approval. Thinking it all over, he knew it'd be hard to do, but if he focused on just studying and working his body in a consistent schedule, then it should be doable. He had 8 months until the finals and he'd have to not slack off even for a second. Though with the body and mental aspects listed, he now needed to design his suit and gear, but he couldn't do that until he learned more about electronics and mechanics, so it'd have to wait. He moved on and just wrote pending on the page. Now it came to a theme or a sort of idea of what type of vigilante he'd be and the suit design would be based on. This is gonna be harder than I thought, said a slightly frustrated Izuku who couldn't come up with anything. Sighing to himself, he closed his book and started to research different exercises from the things he wrote down. Okay. Some of these my body is already ready for, so I should get to work on that now. That is a very good start. Coming up with a new identity and along with a new training schedule for this is a good, Aizawa said with a smirk of approval on his lips. Time skip. The first month Izuku spent doing many workouts of various types and studying 3 main subjects: advanced physics, engineering, and small electronics. He was already ahead in his classes but didn't show it to not have suspicions about him, although Nezu did test him himself to put in the correct grades. But as he worked, some of his classmates took notes and wanted to get another but didn't question it since they figured it would be about Izuku wanting to get better control of his quirk or something. Momo couldn't help but have small stars in her eyes at what he was learning in a quirk amount of time. Due to how her quirk worked, she had to understand all of this very well and wondered if they could quiz each other. The second month was composed of even heavier workouts and finishing up his studies to move on to machinery, advanced engineering, and chemistry. Not much happened in that month, but the muscles he put on were starting to get noticed, which caused him to get a bigger size uniform to hide them better. The girls couldn't help but blush, though Midnight licked her lips. Maybe I should personally give you a uniform 2 sized smaller for your chest, she said with hearts in her eyes as she slowly licked her lips, but Aizawa stopped that. No bad, Midnight, he said as he sprayed her with an anti-horny spray bottle, which resulted in her hissing at him. The third month was some of the most grueling exercises he'd ever done. His studies also bore fruit as he finished up and started studying forensics, biochemistry, and surprisingly psychology. The latter was the most interesting, and he found that he had some mental problems he'd have to fix, like his anxiety and slight PTSD from loud noises. He spent a lot of time fixing these and even went further by learning how to turn off his emotions to becoming nothing but serious and analytical, though he kept his ethics intact much to his relief. All of the pro heroes, especially All Might, Hound Dog, and Nezu, nodded their heads in approval. Very good. They could severely interfere with your work if you have those kinds of problems, Hound Dog said with a small growl coming from his throat. The fourth month came and went and it was much the same as he upped his training more and finished up his studies to move on to others. He started up on poetry, history, and tactics. But this time the studying he did wasn't that hard to do, to the point he finished it up halfway through the month and finally started his martial arts practice. The 3 he'd started were kendo, boxing, and Muay Thai. Aizawa, Snipe, and just about everyone that didn't have a flashy or powerful quirk nodded their heads in approval. That is very good, and those are some very good martial arts to learn, Aizawa said as Kendo and Ojiro nodded in agreement. His martial arts took time, but once he got the basics down he could learn the others more quickly. But it was during this month that something happened. He had finally started his idea about the theme and type of vigilante he wanted to be. For one, he came up with the idea to make all his gear and other supplies from parts he could get from a scrapyard for realism. That is good, as despite it not being that good quality you will find enough to build anything you will need, Power Loader said as many agreed with him. This came to him when he remembered some of the parts he could use could have come from the beach he had cleaned. With that in mind he asked Nezu for a secret area in UA to make his gear. Obviously, the rat god agreed and would now explain his current predicament. He stood in a scrap yard where the trash went after he cleaned the beach. He asked the scrap yard owner about it and the old man happily agreed since the junk would finally be used and not just sit here with that. Izuku scouted the yard and found the things he needed and finally came across something remarkable. Some people couldn't help but chuckle slightly about how enthusiastic the old man was with the junk being used. "Wow, now that could work," said Izuku as he looked upon an old muscle car body and engine block next to it. He went and asked the old man about it and got it to go along with his stuff since it was an old failed passion project that never got finished. Power Loader couldn't help but frown at such a passion project that didn't finish as it had some serious potential. Later on in the month, the stuff got transported to his work area in Ua and he went to work on his ideas for support gear in his suit. Unsurprisingly, he did need to make prototypes which failed and he had to do them over again and again until he would get them right. Month 5 was when Izuku fully made his ideas finalized. In a tired, sweaty state inside his room after an excruciating training session, he sat and in the spur of a moment thought over his life. His head was hung with the seat dripping from his brow. He let out a sigh and thought of a particular memory. The memory was that of how a 7-year-old Bakugo and his lackeys had thrown him inside a well before they left him there. Unbeknownst to them, there was a cave in there that a swarm of bats shot out of and brought a great phobia of bats to him. All of the teachers glared at Bakugo, making him shift slightly. All the members of the Deku squad too frowned at that, and how Bakugo traumatized Izuku, especially Hound Dog growled towards Bakugo. That day had almost forever been forgotten due to the trauma of the experience, and even now he trembled a little, but it was this moment that gave him an idea. He got up from his floor and sat into his desk chair to start drawing and sketching his idea in his sudden spark of inspiration. It took him 15 full minutes to complete it, but when he finished he was satisfied with his final product. "That is a very good rough sketch," Gran Torino said with approval, especially since he was drifting away from the blonde buffoon. It may be crude in practical design, but he quickly accepted it and started brainstorming the intricate details. He had armor already made that he would need to change a bit, but most of his ideas would fit if he designed and fit it all correctly. The 6th moved on and he made some progress on his suit and the various gadgets he'd use, but they were only a quarter way complete right now. He now expected that it'd take him up to the exam date to complete his gear, which wasn't bad, but he was having trouble with his pet project. Said pet project was the muscle car he had been working on this whole time. The car itself was now armored and had bulletproof tires and glass, but he had a problem with the weight this all added onto the body frame. Power Loader had huge stars that replaced his puppies and almost squealed, but stopped himself as he would never hear the end of it from midnight. Much to his disappointment, he had to go to Nezu for help. Although he did have ideas to fix the problem, he wasn't sure which would be best, so he needed a more experienced mind to help. "There is no issue with admitting you need help, young Midoriya," All Might said with a smile, and just about everyone nodded in agreement. The meeting was pretty short as Nezu brought Power Loader, who was informed of the problem Izuku was having. The gasp and girlish squeal that exited the older man would haunt him for his entire life. "So Power Leader sir, can you help me with a recommendation on what I should use or do?" asked Izuku with a small notebook in hand. Power Loader quickly took out a similar small notebook and started to ask questions. "Okay, first, how much weight are we talking and how evenly is it all distributed?" Izuku mulled it over before going into detail on everything Power Leader asked. It took a bit, but once they were finished Izuku had everything he needed to make it so his Batmobile wouldn't fall under its weight. A few students chucked at what Izuku had decided to call his car. The 7th month came and went as it was the same but with different martial arts and some other interesting things to study. His car also was going along smoothly with only minor problems. Some being the fact he had to take out the trunk and plaque the engine in the back for it to fit. The more weight the car had, the more horsepower it needed, which eventually came to how it now was. Another problem was that he needed to order huge tires from the Yaoyorozu's company due to the size being a custom. "He could have asked me, I'm sure I'd be able to give him a discount," Momo muttered to herself, and a few chuckled at her response. The final month was hectic as Izuku rushed to finish up everything and get it all ready for the exam. Thankfully his anxiety was pushed to the side from a few breaking exercises he learned. However, that didn't mean it was any easier, as his room was a complete and utter mess with nose all over his desk, and his bedsheets were on the floor from throwing them there when he got frustrated a few times. Just about everyone from 1A's side seeing how much he was pushing himself and no doubt how much sleep he had lost. Okay, calm down, I just gotta finish the small details on the car which should only take a week, and then I have a few tweaks to my detective vision and bat computer. Said a currently sitting Izuku who was programming on a laptop. What he was programming was a device he called detective vision, which would analyze his surroundings. This gave him the ability to see through walls and see people through them. That is, groundbreaking, especially for underground heroes, Nezu said with a manic smile on his face. Yes, it is something I would like to try, Aizawa slowly admitted. It also could find trails of a specific substance like blood, alcohol, or any other chemical-based substances. However, right now he was programming the aspect that would single out those who were armed and listed them as such in a red glow around their bones was the part of the X-ray function. That is seriously useful. I wonder if it also includes people who have gun-like quirks, Aizawa said. Then on the screen the word said that it does include people with gun quirks. I need those, Aizawa mumbled to himself, getting nods from most people around him. The rest of the month went by in a flash with classes soon ending. Now it was just the final, and Class 1A would be out for summer. On the day after the written test, the class was ushered to the auditorium where they were joined by her sibling Class 1B. However, they soon heard the familiar voice of their chaotic principal who spoke aloud, greeting everyone. At that, they all turned and listened as Nezu continued. Now you may be wondering why you're here, and that could be explained quite easily. It's very simple, as your practical exam will be a sort of simulation that I have come up with. I have a bad feeling about this, Mineta said, for the first time getting nods though reluctantly from the girls. This got a few murmurs amongst the crowd that were soon interrupted with more explanation. The exam will be taking place in a newly made city off the coast of UA that I have constructed and designed to be a full-blown city with a few interesting features. A voice came over the audience and asked, Principal Nezu, sir, what exactly will be doing there that we'll need a fully running city? Izuku turned and saw that it was the class president of Class 1B, Itsuka Kendo. He didn't know the girl personally, but he was somewhat interested in her due to her martial arts ability. This got a small smile from the said girl. Nezu looked at the ginger-haired girl. Ah, that's because there will be human and robotic civilians populating the city. The humans in the exam will be those such as the police, store owners, and medics. See how the robots, who I might add were made from Meihatsume and Power Loader, so they are quite advanced, will act very human-like. They will be hostages and lower-ranked thugs. Izuku then heard his own class president Momo Yaoyorozu speak up. As much as I am interested in this, I realized you didn't mention villains and instead said thugs. Does this mean that the villains will be human as well? As expected from our vicereep, many people from Class 1A said. A laugh came from Nezu, who nodded to this. Of course, very perceptive of you, Yaoyorozu. And yes, the villains will be human as well, due to some of our students who are in the acting course are going to take up those roles. Momo accepted this and then asked another question. If it's not too much to ask, will there be a leader for the heroes and the police? A few murmurs went across the crowd again, and Nezu was inwardly joyful for how promising the Yaoyorozu heiress was, but he again nodded and explained. Yes, and I'll be starting with the police leader. Some of you may know him as Hitoshi Shinso from the general course, who I've been wanting to move to the hero course. Shinso smiled at this, being able to be moved towards the hero course. Everyone who remembered the sports festival knew who Shinso was and found this very interesting. None more than Izuku, who smiled as he knew if Shinso did well on the test, then it would be guaranteed he'd be in his class. But the very recognizable voice of an arrogant prick was heard by everyone. Get to the important part already. Who's gonna be the leader of the heroes, and get to why it's gonna be me. A sigh came from most of Class 1A, and Izuku was no exception as he looked a couple rows to his left at Bakugo, being as arrogant and prideful as ever. After his study into psychology, Izuku realized he had a very abusive relationship with his ex-childhood friend and soon fully stopped his contact with him. Well, it's not that bad, right? Mina said slowly. No, it is time he realized this. They do have an abusive relationship, Aizawa said sternly, giving a glare to Bakugo as the said boy slightly scoffed. If it wasn't necessary, then Izuku didn't even look at the guy. It was noticed by his friends, but they didn't ask as Izuku mentioned he was busy dealing with him, and they left it at that. Back in the auditorium though, a few glares were sent at Dirty Blonde, and he returned them with vigor. Nezu, seeing the two classes were about to get into a shouting match, cleared his throat to get their attention. It didn't take long for them to stop and Nezu decided to humor the Boom Boom Boy. Now that you've settled down, the topic on hero leader is rather simple. The student in charge of both classes will be none other than Itsuka Kendo of Class 1B. Ha, take that, you 1A bastards, Monoma said with a smirk, getting a chop from Kendo. The auditorium was silent until a snarky voice shouted, "Class 1B for the win, baby." Many chuckled at how similar their responses. Groans were heard throughout the crowd and even some teachers, and they heard the voice of Nito Nanoma. Even Izuku sighed at this, much to the amusement of his friends who were next to him. Class B's teacher Vlad King snapped at his blonde student. "Monoma, shut up and let the principal continue, or I'll have you do 200 push-ups while I sit on your back." Cue a gulp from the said blonde. A few giggles were heard around him. Bub Monoma did as he was told since he didn't wanna do that punishment again. However, it was Kendo who spoke up once again. Sir, and I truly the best choice for the job." The anxiousness could be heard in her voice, but Nezu responded nonetheless. "You are suited for it, yes, not fully, but that's why it's an exam. You can't always be in a favorable position in hero work, but you must push through to save lives, so no, you're not the most suited, but that's exactly why you were picked." Kendo slightly blushed but smiled at how her principal believed in her. Kendo was a little embarrassed at the looks she was getting but accepted her role in the exam. In his seat, Izuku was very interested in her behavior, as it was implied she didn't think she was worthy of such a role and made it a good point to keep an eye on her later in the exam. After a few more questions and pictures being shown of the practice city codenamed Gotham, the classes were ushered back to their classrooms and Class 1A were informed of Izuku not being in the exam. "What?" shouted the friends and a few others. Ochako Araraki was the most vocal. "What do you mean Deku-kun isn't gonna be in the exam? It's the final, he can't miss it." "Well, at least we know what he is going to do now," Iida said with a nod. Aizawa sighed deeply while rubbing his temples. "Listen, his exam is gonna be different. Due to his many injuries, Nezu has decided that he should be tested on his quirk control, and if not up to snuff will be tried under Gran Torino to up his control." A few grumbled, "That's unfair," and, "Aw man, he would have been a good asset in the exam." Were all stopped by a glare from Aizawa. "Anyway, that's not important right now. What's important is that you all get ready for your exam, which will start in 2 days. Unlike you lot, Izuku will be leaving later tonight, so say your goodbyes or whatever and don't cry about it." The bell then rang and classes were let out for the day. Much to Izuku's slight annoyance and happiness, his friends surrounded and gave him reassurance on his test and gave him many, many hugs. Later that night, Izuku had his bags packed and was saying goodbye to his friends. "Come on guys, you'll be fine. Maybe you'll need help, but that's what Class 1B is for." Many smiled at what Izuku said and others nodded in agreement. Shoto Todoroki shrugged at this with a small smile. "Yeah, but it's not gonna be the same without you there with us." Ochako nodded and added, "Damn right. Deku-kun is just cool like that." Many smiled at what Shoto and Ochako said and the students mentally agreed with them. Izuku chuckled at his friends' behavior and thanked them for their kindness. They didn't get to talk longer as a car pulled up and honked. "Problem child, get your ass over here and get in. You can kiss your little girlfriend later." Izuku and Ochako Sho were rather close to each other when this was said and blushed before moving away from each other. With a shaky wave he said goodbye and went to get into the car with Aizawa. The car pulled out not long after and he could hear the shouts of good luck from his friends and classmates. He couldn't help but smile at this and waved back from the window. Sitting next to him, Aizawa could only smirk and ponder. "I wonder how you've improved and grown, Midoriya." January 24th, day of the exam. Izuku had arrived with Aizawa in Nezu's office and were now taking an elevator to somewhere only Nezu knew. Of course, many mumble. Sitting in silence was all right with the three of them and they didn't need to wait long as the elevator dinged to notify them of their arrival at their destination. When the doors opened they were shown the place Nezu wanted to get them to. Izuku whistled and looked around the small subway station and he took notice of the small yet fast-looking train on the rails. Before he could look around more he was guided towards the train to get on. He did so and sat in a comfortable seat next to his teacher with his principal sitting down across from them in a custom-made chair with a tea set to its right side. A few moments after entering and taking a seat the train started to move at what Izuku could only suspect to be going around 60 miles an hour. "That would be correct, Midoriya," Nezu said with a smile. The small chit-chatting that filled the air was helpful for Izuku's nerves, as much as he tried to calm himself down he simply couldn't due to a certain thing he was trying to come to terms with. The problem was trying to get over his mental dilemma on how his new or rather true persona would be used in the exam. He had long since realized his personality was a mask for his past trauma. Many frowned, especially the Deku squad, how he had to create a new personality from the trauma. Being his old happy-go-lucky self always felt wrong, yet he never knew why until now. It took some tests and some self-evaluation until he stumbled upon the realization that he had an emotional mask. Said mask was to hide his pain from his bullies and most importantly his mother, who he didn't want to see hurt from seeing his truly broken self. Many looked down in sadness, especially All Might, the Deku squad, and Momo. It took some getting used to, but some exercises on mental stability helped him drop the mask when he was alone. However, he hadn't ever dropped it in front of people before, so this would be the first time doing so. He sighed deeply, which didn't go unnoticed by his teachers, Aizawa especially worried at this new side of his student. Problem child, you doing okay? Izuku tensed at the question but replied, why, just some apprehension is all. You'll do amazing, young Midoriya, All Might thought to himself. Aizawa took a glance at Nezu, who nodded. You know, problem child, if it's about dropping the mask then you could back out at any time. Izuku gripped his pants before answering, I know, but this needs to happen. This is a test for me to finally break out of my mask and become the person I'm truly meant to be. These words made Nezu and Aizawa proud of their young charge, and Nezu spoke. That's quite a task ahead of you, my boy. I have to say I'm looking forward to your debut. Am I my future self? Am I my future self? Nezu said with a grin. Izuku smiled and thanked him. It was also then that they arrived at their destination, which happened to be the base Izuku would be using in the exam. That is, perfect, especially with his bat costume, Shoto said with a nod, getting many to agree with him. Wow, this is nice, although I am curious. Why an abandoned train station? Asked Izuku, who inspected the place. Nezu chuckled and answered, well, you've said before that you would be making your gear out of scrap metal to portray realism, so why not use an abandoned area as a base? I guess that makes sense. Oh, and you've even placed my bat computer down here, Izuku said, seeing his advanced computer placed on a wall. Walking over to it, he logged in and started typing quickly. This packed Nezu's and Aizawa's interest as they watched Izuku as he worked. Many, especially those who were not idiots, Mina and Denki, were curious about what he was doing. It took no more than a minute for Izuku to finish up, and a mature male voice echoed from the screen. Good morning, sir. I see it's time for the exam. Correct, Alfred. Can you do a diagnostic test connecting to the city's mainframe? Izuku asked. Of course, sir. I'll be giving you a detailed map with points of interest, Alfred responded and did his assigned task. My Midoriya, if I'm not mistaken then that would be an AI. You do know, even with all our advancements over the years, we have still barely scratched the surface of such technology, and yet here you are with what seems to be a fully functioning AI, said a very amused Nezu. Amazing, he truly created an AI. Momo and Iida said almost in unison as their eyes were large in how surprised they were, but Power Loader had an entire star for eyes, showing how happy he was seeing this. Aizawa also jumped in with an eyebrow raised. Problem child, I know from what Nezu has told me that you've improved and have learned a lot for your role, but how far have you gotten while on your own? Izuku rubbed his neck anxiously before speaking. Well, I kinda already had the bare bones for Alfred that I've been making over the years, but I never had the skills until recently to finish making him. And as for your question, Aizawa, I'm not that far ahead. I think. You not far, my ass, Mineta mumbled as a few agreed with him, but many girls glared at the pervert. The two adults took a glance at each other before smiling and giving a proud nod. They then watched as Izuku set up his gear and made sure to study the map he got from Alfred. After a while, Nezu and Aizawa left the cave to get the students for their exam to start. This left Izuku on his own to think and ponder his goal in the exam. His job was to portray a vigilante he dubbed the Batman, who would go after the villains in the exam, although he wasn't given that much information on them as he needed to find that stuff out on his own. That is an amazing name for his vigilante name. It's such a manly name, Kirishima yelled out with a large grin. However, it was then he was finished setting up his suit on an armor stand that he found himself staring into the eyes of the cowl. The eyes bore into his own and he was brought back to a memory of his past. Flashback. In a dark room inside apartment number 1915 Saturday Izuku Midoriya at the age of 8, it was nighttime and young Izuku was crying about what he went through that day. This was a usual occurrence of bullying and as usual, Izuku hid his pain from his mother which he instead bottled it up until he was alone. However, today was one of the worst days as Bakugo had told him something despicable. The bomber boy had told Izuku that his father had left him and his mother due to him being quirkless and that he didn't want to take care of a useless Deku for a son. Bakugo, just about every single person from 1A yelled as Aizawa grabbed the back of his neck. Once this is over we are going to have a long talk. Am I understood Bakugo? He asked slowly with his eyes red. Bakugo slowly nodded. And many pro-heroes looked at him in disgust for what he had said. It took Izuku all his strength to not fall to his knees and sob at those words on the spot, but it took, even more, to not punch his once-a-time friend right in his stupid teeth. Do it, many who were still pissed off yelled out. This brought us to our current sight as Izuku clenched a photo to his chest. Said photo was of his mother and late father who died not even a week later after his birth in his job as a firefighter. Many looked down in sadness and Bakugo's eyes widened as he didn't know Deku's father was dead. Bakugo wasn't told of his father's death and just assumed things, but that didn't matter now as Izuku placed the photo down on his desk with a shaky hand. He wiped his eyes and choked a sob from escaping. His hand then reached for his phone and placed his earbuds into his ears. His thumb scrolled through a music app until he came across a song that piqued his interest. The song cover was of three men in a car with nice gothic clothes and makeup. Usually, he wouldn't be into this sort of music but the name had caught his attention and he didn't see any problem with at least giving it a chance. He pressed play and listened to the first few seconds and immediately liked how it sounded but then the lyrics hit which touched a few emotional wounds in the poor boy. Now Izuku wasn't an angsty person by any means but he could see the appeal of such musical and from there on he would branch out and listen to more of this type of music and bands. Tokiyami nodded. You do know the beauty of the darkness Midoriya. Eventually, he started to get into poetry and historical quotes that he could understand and sympathize with. One quote he found would forever be burned into his memory. Battle not with monsters, lest ye become a monster, and if you give into the abyss gazes also into you. At the time he didn't know why he found it so inspiring and why he couldn't forget it, but only now could he understand why. That is truly a very good quote, Nezu said in approval. Flashback ends. Izuku held the cowl piece of his costume and gazed into the eyes deeply while speaking openly. The abyss looks into all of us at some point. It's just a matter of if you blink under its never-ending gaze that defines you. He did take that to heart, Miriko admitted and many agreed with her. So cool, Kota and many childish people yelled out with stars in their eyes. With that said Izuku put the cowl back onto the stand and walked over to his belongings to finish up the last of the unpacking. With Nezu and Aizawa, the rat god looked over his minions and spoke happily. Shut up and listen you bunch of virgins, it's time for you all to get your asses into the fake city. Everyone had sweat dropped at what Nezu had said. Everyone's sweat dropped at this but didn't speak against their maniac of a principal. Nezu when seeing he had all of their attention continued his speech. So before you all go in there I have to mention that there are a few key things you need to know. Firstly, there is a special oddity in the exam who can either help you or be against you depending on your interactions with him. The classes digested this and a curious hand went up in a question. Nezu saw Ciro's arm held up and pointed to him and asked, "Yes, Spooderman." Everyone had busted out laughing at what Nezu had called Ciro. Ciro tilted his head in confusion before getting back to his question. Is the person a cop or something? Everyone gave him a deadpan look on his face. Do you think Nezu would do something like this if it was that simple? Most of Class 1A and all UA teachers said at the same time as Ciro sunk into his chair. Nezu laughed manically before getting deadly serious. No, and since that question was stupid I won't be answering any more questions from here on out. Cue every student glaring at Ciro as he sunk deeper into his chair. The students glared at Ciro who shrunk in on himself. Nezu seeing he already made one of his students suffer decided to start explaining again. Already then, the second key thing you need to know is that the guns the criminals and police will be using are small bullets that when hit with one will tase the shit out of you, so watch out for those. The students groaned at this but Nezu laughed at their pain. Yes, feel pain and fuel my immortality, ha 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 ha. On the sidelines, the teachers were sat and wondering why they didn't put Nezu in therapy, but then remembered how said principal escaped through a vent to grapple away whenever they wanted to trap him and throw him into Hound Dog's therapy room. We need to find out how to get him to therapy, many of the teachers whispered to themselves as they nodded, though unknown to them Nezu heard them loud and clear. They all sighed and Recovery Girl went over and smacked Nezu. Once the principal calmed down, he cleared his throat and spoke calmly, sorry about that, now back to what I was saying. The last thing you need to know is that the teachers and some special guests will be watching your performance from our observation room, so do be on your best behavior. Some of the students who were going to be more laid back grumbled and stood a little straighter to get serious, and some of the more professionals like Iida and Momo simply smiled at the chance to show their worth while also getting their more childish classmates to act more serious for once. Since he was done explaining, Nezu walked away and let the students get onto their buses. They were doing that, Nezu guided the teachers to the train he had built to go to the observation room. When Aizawa asked why he had 2 trains in Ua, Nezu laughed and said, "Oh, you only know of 2 of them." Hearing this made the teachers' faces fall before regaining their footing. They then gave a deadpan look before shaking their heads at their principal's antics. "Oh, this will be fun," Nezu said with a large grin on his face, with his voice slightly higher. Time skip an hour. Nezu and his posse entered the large and comfortable room with big monitors at the end that showed the inside of the fake city. Looking at said screens, you could now see the populated city by the acting students and plenty of androids. The group of teachers and master were met by the Public Safety Commission president, who greeted them. "Nezu and friends, it's good to see you again. Although I am curious why you have invited me here to watch an exam for first years." "Wait, the president is going to watch?" Mina asked, shocked, and her eyes widened as the others were equally nervous. Nezu nearly grinned before responding, "I think you going to find this year 1A and B's exercise rather interesting. This is after all the first time in UA's history that something like this has ever happened." The president, known as Yuki Yuzashi, gave an amused smile and asked, "And what will make this so interesting, if I may ask?" "Yeah, something tells me Nezu will start doing things like this more often," Midnight said as many nodded with her. The smirk on Nezu's face became a full smile that almost reached his ears. "A student of mine had come up with the bones of the exam and I added to it. We came up with the more complex details together, and he is a special role in this that you will find fairly interesting. And if that's not enough, then his reasons for coming up with this may do the trick." Hearing this made not only Yuki but the others in the room also become curious and wonder what he meant and what would happen later in the exam. Yet one of the pro heroes in the room was more vocal in her excitement. "Oh, this is gonna be either lame or exciting for a bunch of twerps," said the tanned woman in a white leotard. "Agreed, future me, agreed." A woman to her right flicked one of her rabbit ears to stop her friend, Rumi, from being so loud and sit down. Rumi Usagiyama, also known as Mirko, gave a strong punch to her friend, who simply tanked it. Said friend was the dragon heroine Yukio, or a civilian named Ryoko Tatsuma. Mineta, being his usual perverted self, drooled at the sight of the 2 gorgeous pro heroines. Ryoko snickered at her friend and patted her head. The scene itself was funny, but no one dared laugh since they didn't wanna get kicked by an angry Mirko. The said woman smirked but also had an angry blush on her face. The hero arts teacher of Ua, Nimari Kayama, the pro heroine Midnight, noticed one of their guests and asked aloud, "Gran Torino, sir, if you are here, then where's Midoriya-kun?" The elderly hero scoffed, "The brat's fine and in the exam. He's doing something for Nezu from what I've been told." Nimari quirked an eyebrow in confusion and glanced at Nezu. It wasn't that much of a secret that the R-rated heroine had gotten quite close with the green-haired teen these past few months, but what no one knew was that she had started having a full-blown crush on him. Everyone looked at her as Midnight's face turned bright red at this info being leaked out. "Not a word," she warned them, as a few chuckled and others laughed, but no one said anything else. Well, no one knew that besides Nezu, but that hardly counted due to him knowing almost everything. Shaking her head from her thoughts, Nimari replied to Gran Torino, "But we were told he wasn't gonna be in this exam and instead had a different one which you were supposed to be overseeing." Torino sighed and shook his head. "No, that's just a cover I was told of. If you want more details, ask his doofus of a mentor." The residents in the room looked over to where Torino was pointing with his cane and all eyes widened at All Might. The said man was sweating profusely and glanced anywhere but their peering eyes. All the students along with the pro-heroes aside from All Might, Gran Torino, and Nezu's eyes widened. You were personally training Midoriya, Iida said in awe for his friend. Yeah, All Might said as Miriko suddenly got much more interested in Midoriya as her foot started to tap much faster. One of the ones most interested was Mirko. Oi tall, blonde and muscle-brained, what the hell does he mean by mentor? All Might fidgets in places before speaking, well it's kinda complicated. Torino sighed and bopped his student on the head, just the answer to the girl's question before I kicked your ass and throw you to the reporters. Torino smirked at this as All Might just about all the pro-heroes paled. Hearing the last part made everyone shiver, not ever wanting to be in that predicament, but Toshinori Yagi was anything but afraid. I knew All Might wasn't afraid of anything, Kirishima yelled out with a large grin on his face. He was utterly horrified. Or not, Aizawa said with a smirk. And now sensei, is it really that much of an issue that I have a student I've been training for almost 2 years? Asked a heavily sweating Toshinori. Lucky nerd, Bakugo mumbled to himself. The deadpanned glare he received from not only Mirko but also Midnight, Aizawa, and Yuki said it all. But before Toshinori could get his shit rocked, Nezu intervened. Calm down, you a bunch of worms, we got some teenagers to watch fuck up their exam or do slightly okay. The said students' sweat dropped at their principal. Hearing Nezu made the majority calm down, but Rumi was still excited to hear that the All Might had an apprentice what she could dance with was getting her blood hot and her foot thrumming. But the excitement didn't stop there as they all then heard the sound of footsteps and a loud feminine voice from a door to the side of the room bellowed. It took no less than a minute before the pair of doors were thrown open and in walked Mei Hatsume, Melissa Shield, and David Shield. It's been a while, especially since the Island disaster, All Might said with a smile at his best friend and his daughter, those who were on the floating island and shaken with slight fear. The elder Shield grinned and walked over to Power Loader. Hey there Higuri, good to see you again. Power Loader, also known as Ichigari Maijima, chuckled and gave a manly handshake. Same here David, sorry to hear about your wife and the recent incident on Iceland. David grimaced slightly and rubbed his healed bullet wound. Yeah, Mary died a few years back and the whole Iceland even could have gone better. Power Loader and those who participated in the incident frowned. Power Loader sighed at the last part and nodded. It's a damn shame really when people like Samuel, who were two greedy makeup scientists, have a bad name. The two continued to talk like old friends. Melissa and May went over to their little corner to talk some more. May had somehow gotten a whiteboard and was drawing some rough but very complex sketches. And this right here is why I think Mr. Muscles should have a skin-tight suit instead of his green baggy stuff, explained May with a slight blush. Melissa was doing much better as her face was merely a shade of bright pink and adjusted her glasses. 2C, I have to agree, but why all white in color and with the suit being made of absorbent material? May grinned with some blood coming out of her nose. Because if he gets wet then the white material will soak up the water and give a good show of what's underneath to not only distract his enemies but give the media a good show. All of the girls blushed as the pro-heroes couldn't help but sigh. Unbeknownst to the two girl inventors, the rest of the room had taken interest in their talk and couldn't believe what they were hearing, although a few of the females were slightly interested in who they were speaking about. But before anyone could speak or interact with each other, the main screen monitors switched and showed two buses arriving at a large building. Ooh, here we go, where's the popcorn machine? Asked May. As some were about to say how ludicrous that question was, Nezu pointed to the side and said, over there along with the alcohol and other food items. How did we miss that? The present Mike asked as no one answered. The silence that enveloped the room as they started at the assortment of food and drinks they all somehow missed was deafening. With a sigh and shrug, each got what they wanted before sitting to watch the exam. With students in the buses. All I'm saying is that it's not gay to be slightly attracted to other guys, it's only natural to like what's appealing, said the blonde Pikachu of Class 1A. The class simply looked at the blonde boy before one of them spoke. Denki bro, it's alright if you are interested in Shinso, but you don't have to explain why it's cool to be gay. We're alright with it and will support you. Aizawa's eye furiously twitched at the thought of Denki getting with his adopted son as Denki felt a shiver of terror go down his spine. The redhead shark boy gave his friend a sharp grin and Denki teared up. Thanks guys, now all I gotta do is tell him. A few of the girls started to talk and try to help Denki come up with a good plan of action to get him into a relationship, while the rest of the ride was somewhat normal until they finally arrived at their destination. "Wow, that's a big building," said an awestruck Ochako Uraraka. "It really is," Jiro admitted with her friend. "Yeah, but I wonder why. I mean there are many of us going to be staying here, but it shouldn't be that big if we're sharing rooms." Speaking a more analytical voice which belongs to Momo Yaoyorozu. Many agreed with Momo for the reason why the building is so large. After the classes exited the buses fully, they stood in front of the building and hastily went inside. When they entered the lobby they were flabbergasted at just how lavish the place was. That wasn't all though. As they went to their rooms and saw nice-sized beds in 2 pairs in each room, they couldn't help but get excited and hyped for what was going to come. Aizawa frowned at this, seeing how they were treating this like a game. It didn't take that long for them to unpack and start organizing their roles and patrols. It took barely 30 minutes before they each set out in pairs to their designated area. The ones who stayed at the HQ were Kendo, Tsuyu, and Iida to help communicate between teams and be backup support just in case of an incident. So far they are doing well, but let's see how they will do in the field, Snipe thought. The patrols went relatively well and the teams did well together. The teams encountered minor crimes for the day, with the biggest of the crimes being a robber of a jewelry store which Bakugo and Kirishima took down quite easily. One aspect the students weren't ready for would be the reports and paperwork that came along with it. Many if not all were slightly depressed by the latter part but got over it once they realized this was emulating their future as heroes. "No our pain," all of the heroes said with a deadpan look on their faces as the students sunk into their chairs. When the time reached sundown most teams went back to HQ to rest and sort their allotted paperwork and debriefings to their leaders. In all the classes their allotted paperwork and debriefings to leaders, in all the classes, were in high spirits and went to sleep with high expectations for the following day. However, they didn't account for one thing that would be noted down for their grades, this being that they only had 2 or 3 relatively small teams out for the night shift who would soon go back and rest, leaving the city completely unguarded. Aizawa sighed aloud along with a few of the others, a small mistake in planning which can have major consequences. Thankfully this will be a learning experience for them. "Agreed, future me, we will see how far they will go," Aizawa said with a blank look on his face. The room nodded along to this and Nezu added to it, "Yes, since this is quite the exercise we can't be too hard due to its complexity." The Public Safety Commission president hummed at this and turned to Nezu. "Yes, but I believe it's time you spoke about the elephant in the room." Nezu nodded. "Ah yes, I do believe it's time for him to be getting ready." Nezu pressed a few buttons as everyone paid attention to the screens which flickered to some sort of underground train station. The teach heads immediately noted the technology and lighting installed into the station and couldn't help but be interested. However, when they saw a figure exit the shadows in an armored suit with a cape attached to it, Mirko asked, "Who's tall, dark and gothic?" "Not gonna lie, he's pretty hot in that suit." All of the women nodded in agreement with this and a few licked their lips. Ryuko looked at her friend incredulously but couldn't react to her words. The man did look quite dashing with his messy hair and strong jawline. Her thoughts were shared with the female mechanic twins and a certain arts teacher. Said girls blushed darkly as this got chucked from the ones around them. However, the thoughts were stopped when Nezu answered, "Ah yes. This is Izuku Midoriya of Class 1A and one of the top students who helped me come up with his exercise." The PSC president raised an eyebrow at this and asked, "And you said he had a personal reason for this earlier, right? If so, can you indulge us on why a student is doing this all in secret?" Nezu let the question sit for the others to think it over before he responded. "Midoriya was misdiagnosed quirkless at the age of 4 and has gone through years of torment for it. This test is to show if he could have become a hero if he didn't awaken his quirk the day of the entrance exam." A pin could be dropped as the entire room went silent with wide eyes at this new information. None of them knew about any of this and now questioned themselves. These questions ranged from how Izuku managed to learn to deal with his powerful quirk to such an amazing extent in such little time. To show exactly this test would help him in seeing if he could be a quirkless hero. "It is amazing if you think about it," Cementos said with a smile on his face. But these thoughts were interrupted when a furious Aizawa spoke up. "Why wasn't I told of this sooner?" Aizawa nodded with his future self. "I am going to have a talk with you two later about this," he said towards Nezu and All Might. They all turned to see Aizawa completely fuming and staring daggers into Nezu and Toshinori. The latter gulped with sweat pouring from his brow. And now eyes. A few chuckled as All Might, especially Gran Torino as the said hero sulked. Toshinori was cut off with an Aizawa scarf around his neck and strangling him. I want answers. Nezu, seeing all this drama, pressed a button and a green blur shot out of the ceiling and onto Aizawa's lap. Eraserhead, marry me. Blinking in confusion, Aizawa looked down at Emi Fukukado, also known as Ms. Joke. He sighed deeply before taking a deep breath and replying. Later, now sit down and let me finish the question. All Might and Nezu. Emi perked up at the one refusal, non-exception, and did as she was told, grinning to present Mike and Nomori. With Emi out of the way, Aizawa let his scarf let go of Toshinori and returned to shifting his gaze between tall blonde and Nezu. I want answers, and they better be logical. Just like her future self, Emi looked up in hope that her object of despite would finally agree to be with her. That being said, Toshinori quickly explained his whole story to Izuku minus the parts about OFA, and Nezu simply said he didn't say anything since it would have taken out all the fun in him finding out. What is OFA? Shodo asked before All Might could say something stupid. Gran Torino answered. All you need to know is that it is a high-ranking secret. If Midoriya decides to tell you, he will. Otherwise you don't need to know, he said as they nodded a bit. Hopefully Izuku would someday tell them. All Might gave his mentor a nod. Thank you, he mouthed as Gran Torino nodded at the blonde buffoon. To say Aizawa was regretting his life choices was an understatement. He pondered his life as he sat with Emi wrapped around his arm with promises of having his children and lots of cats. Meanwhile, as the poor teacher of Class 1A was regretting everything, Melissa Shield was conflicted. At one point she was ecstatic to see Izuku still wanted to be a hero while he was quirkless, but on the other hand she was in the same scenario, yet she gave up on her dream. I hope you can prove me wrong, young Midoriya. All Might thought to himself, thinking back to what he had originally said and deeply regretting it. And the fact Izuku was still trying to test if he could or not, even though he now had a quirk, hit a chord in her chest that felt strange and warm at the same time. Her hand clenched her shirt over her heart and she spoke softly. Maybe I could have become a hero too? With Izuku inside the Batcave, bats fluttered throughout the cave, screeching as Izuku got into his suit. It weighed a ton, but the protection was worth it for the mission, his goal. Awesome. Many had shouted out about the costume. After he was done getting suited up, he went to his armory wall which held his gadgets, looking upon them with pride in his eyes. Those are beautiful babies, May said with a large smile as the other techies smiled in agreement. He took some batarangs, smoke pellets, EMP devices, small explosives, and finally his newly made experimental stood he dubbed rather simply his hacking device, which allowed him to hack into a large number of things, from phones to a building electrical systems, and had a small camera implanted inside of it to capture evidence. Amazing tools, though the hacking device needs a better name, Melissa said as a few nodded in agreement. Once done getting set up, he walked over to the Batcomputer to analyze any points of interest such as strange crimes or unique villains in certain areas of Gotham. He found a couple of things interesting, such as a nightclub owned by a man named Oswald Cobblepot, and a crime being reported near the docks. Wow, Denki, Mina, and Zero said with amazement. That is an amazing baby. Wow, I wonder how effective it is, May and Melissa said at the same time as Powerloader and David looked at it in amazement. Narrowing his eyes, he donned his cowl before taking the tarp off of the Batmobile in all its glory. Without delay he opened the door and entered into the armored muscle car. With a flip of the ignition switch, the engine fired up with a loud roar and a blue flame flared from the back exhaust. His foot fit the pedal and the car screeched as it flew out of the abandoned station and down a tunnel system heading towards the docks. What the Batmobile looks like. I want it. I want to drive it, Powerloader shouted with a deranged look in his eyes as he had a large grin on his face. Calm down, Powerloader, Mike said as he lightly hit his helmet, making the inventor grumble. In the observation room, Mirko's jaw dropped along with pretty much the entire room. Do y'all all see what I'm seeing? Mei Hatsume responded with stars in her eyes. If you see muscles in a heavy armored muscle car while wearing an armored suit that resembles a bat, then yes, we are seeing the same super cool and amazing thing. Agreed, future me, those babies are amazing, Mei said to her future self as a few chuckled. Melissa shifted her glasses as she inspected the car on screen. I have to say it's quite remarkable that the car can move at such a speed even with all that armor. The engine must be something else if it can make the horsepower needed to move so much weight while the transmission doesn't give out under all that weight moving back and forth. May and her father nodded in agreement with what her future self had said. Her father David hummed at this and nodded in agreement. Yes, you're probably right, though I've never seen such an engine that would need an exhaust like that or any transmission system other than a tank that could do all that. And on closer inspection, the windows and window frames are thick and reinforced to be bulletproof or stronger. Denki looked like his brain had short-circuited as Jiru rolled her eyes. Basically how he upgraded the car with an engine that tanks usually have, Jiru said with a sigh as she had to dumb it down for him and a few of the dumber members of the class. Oh, Denki said as he nodded. May quickly started writing ideas for the car on the whiteboard from earlier and collaborated with Shields and Powerloader on what they could improve or change to make it better. While that group was talking about the car, the heroes were talking about the armor. Either way, his tech is amazing, it being his car or his armor, Melissa said with a smile. Snipe turned to Cementors. That suit looks pretty dang heavy. You think the kid is strong enough to fight with that much weight on him? Cementos rubbed his non-existent chin. I've seen Midoriya lift at least 3 tons without his quirk and run with that weight strapped to him. I don't think it makes much of a difference weight-wise, but rather movement. All Might nodded in agreement. Yes, weight-wise it won't do much, but the main issue is mobility, he said as they agreed with the former number one hero. Hound Dog raises his brow at that. Movement. I can see what you mean. The weight will shift due to his center of gravity easily due to his momentum at times, so he may overreach or throw too much into punches and kicks when he doesn't want to. And that's without talking about the joints being blocked from the armor not giving enough room or the strain they will have from all that pressure on them. Yes, as Hound Dog explained, his armor has a high chance of weighing him down significantly, Aizawa said, not really from the weight itself but from how he will fight with so much weight on him. I will have to agree with Aizawa here, Emi said seriously for one of the first time. Everyone in the room chatted about one thing or another while Toshinori was simply smiling while watching the screen. So this is what your version of a quirkless hero is, young Midoriya. I have to say it's rather different from what I expected, but in a good way. I hope you find the answers you're looking for, my boy, and come out of this for the better. All Might nodded in agreement with his future self. At the docks. Bang 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 bang. Shit. Dispatch, we are under heavy fire at the docks. A young student playing a police officer shouted into his radio as bullets pelted his police cruiser. His partner tried shooting back but had to take cover from a swarm of bullets aimed at him. Damn, these guys are brutal. What's the ADA on the heroes? They're working on it. Just stay under cover and wait these bastards out. The now irritated cop responded to his partner as glass had gotten in his hair. A few pitied the man, as having glass in your hair can't be fun at all. Said partner sighed and mumbled to himself, should have signed up for a normal occupation in this exam, at least then I'd be out of the rain. The students felt bad for him and the teachers slightly chuckled about that. It was then that their radios went off. Patrol unit, we got bad news. Heroes are at least 15 minutes from your location. The best you can do is sit tight and don't engage if unnecessary. The 2 cops cursed and one radioed back, do we at least have police backup on the way? After a moment there was a reply, yes, but they can't get too close without being fired upon. Oh, just our fucking luck, curses the other cop as dismay. Aizawa nodded. This is a pretty common situation, especially at night. He spoke as his students listened to him with his experience as an underground hero. However, a noise pierced the air to their surprise. Turning their attention towards the east street, they could see something black heading right towards them from down the road. In a panic, the 2 raised their weapons pointing at it, but were shocked a few seconds later to see a heavily armored car that parked in front of them and blocking incoming bullet fire. Go Midoriya, kick their asses, go Deku, were some of the responses that the students of Class 1A shouted as they saw him showing up to save the officers. One of the cops yelled out, you a hero. The door opened and a just as heavily armored individual got out and turned towards the warehouse on the docks where the gunmen were firing from. In a quick movement a smoke pellet dropped into his gloved hand and he flicked his arm out to throw it into the warehouse just behind the gunman. And in a matter of seconds there was a big cloud of smoke and the gunmen turned back to see it. They registered surprise until they turned back with their guns drawn in his direction. But this was not to be, as the armored man threw out his other arm and many projectiles flew through the air and into the barrels of the guns, effectively making them blow up when the triggers were fired, rendering them unconscious. "Amazing, did you see how he disarmed them that quickly and how he knocked them out?" an excited Mirko shouted out to her friend. "Yes, I saw it, Rumi, now calm down," she said as Mirko reluctantly sat down. "Like this though, several, and they hit the barrels of the gun to make them explode." With another flick of the figure's opposite wrist, a grappling gunshot was into his awaiting hand and he shot it into the railing of the warehouse's roof, but before he activated the grapple's pulley system he turned and gave the police officer an answer. "I'm not a hero, I'm Batman." "Manly," Hiroshima yelled out. With that said, he shot off at incredible speed and flung himself over the railing and onto the rooftop while making minimal sound to not alert those inside. He stood quietly and then approached the skylight before he peered into the inside of the warehouse using his detective vision. There were about 3 armed men at the main door of the warehouse who were originally firing upon the cops, who were now designated unconscious from his scan, which left the others, who were identified to be repeat offenders with their quirks listed on their records. "I seriously need Problem Child to make a copy for me," Aizawa said, truly seeing how useful they are and also how it would seriously help him in the field. 2 emitters and 1 strength enhancement. Shouldn't be too difficult if I pick the emitters first," he thought before making a strategy. Reaching towards his utility belt, Batman dug out an EMP device and opened the glass door, dropping the active device into the warehouse, where it landed and shouted out a pulse of radio wave energy that would disrupt technology that wasn't specifically insulated like his own. The lights of the warehouse flickered before turning off fully, and the only light illuminating the large room was the 2 skylights, one of which Batman was currently at. Narrowing his eyes, Batman placed a small explosion on the glass. He covered the lower part of his face and the bomb activated, blowing the glass up and allowing him to jump into the warehouse with ease. "Enter like a badass," many said instantly. "That is a good strategy," Snipe said with a nod as the heroes agreed with him. Batman landed on the ground and stood up slowly, gazing at the 3 thug bots. In quick succession, he was attacked with fire, electricity, and a large fist. But none of them hit as the Batman dodged the elemental attacks, slipped past the punch, and lunged towards the 2 emitters. He struck them swiftly and with lots of power behind his blows, knocking them both out with well-placed punches to their respective chin and liver. This wasn't all though, as he turned back to the strength enhancer. He had to duck under a sloppy kick and capitalize by kicking the leg out from under the rather large thug, causing him to fall on his face. But Batman wasn't done, as he continued to use his opportunity to grab the arm of the thug and twisted it to make the bot grunt in its robotic voice. Batman scanned the room for any more threats and realized he only had the one under him to deal with. He looked down at the grunt with his detective vision active. He looked through his file from the Gotham City Police Department, GCPD for short, and found the thug to be a small-time guy with no real experience in this sort of situation. Figuring this out, he pulled his emotions inward and let his darker side out to play, his voice coming out gruff and intimidating. "Devin Parker, low-time criminal mainly known for small theft and 1 case for Grand Theft Auto. Now the real question is, why are you here at the docks?" A few flinched, mostly the students, at how intimidating Izuku sounded with his new suit. The android replied, "I don't know what you're arg." Batman twisted the arm more, causing the metal to crack loudly. "Wrong answer. Now talk and I won't break every bone in your body." To say the android was fearful was an understatement, as its voice came out distorted with fright. "You don't know much. All I know is that we were moving chemicals through the docks and the boss wanted it shipped tonight specifically." Batman's eyes narrowed and he pressed the arm more. "Explain." "We had a paper. A clipboard in the truck has all the details. That's all I know, so please stop." The Batman contemplated what to do for a moment, but when the android tried to sneak a knife from its pants pocket, the dark vigilante broke the arm and dropped his fist down on top of the android's head, making a crunching sound. "He's going to feel that in the morning," Denki joked, getting a slap over the back of his head. Sighing a little in relief at his first fight going well, Batman got up and walked to the truck the goons had been loading. When the cops arrived, he opened the passenger door and looked in to see a clipboard with papers clipped in it. He grabbed the clipboard and looked it over for details. The papers had one thing of importance, which was a location he knew all too well, as he had just looked up the location before heading out. The Iceberg Lounge, I'll investigate this further as a possible side objective to the exam. Aizawa and a few others nodded in approval. Setting the clipboard back down on the seat, Batman stepped back and turned towards the main warehouse door where he exited the building and started heading towards his car. The cops stood up from under their cover and one of them asked, "Did you get him?" Batman nodded and got into his car. However, he was stopped before he closed his door as the other cop asked, "Wait, what did you mean earlier that you weren't a hero? What are you, some sort of vigilante or something?" Batman only stops for a second before looking at the officer and nodding. Right after that the door closes and the Batmobile shoots off and into the night, leaving both police officers surprised and shocked about what they just learned. "Badass," Miriko said with drool coming from her mouth, making her fellow heroes chuckle. "So, the secret component to the exam Nezu was talking about is a vigilante?" one officer asked. The other just shrugged, taking off his cap to pay the glass out of his hair. "I guess so, but why a vigilante is what I'm wondering." They stayed standing there until Reinforcements arrived on the scene with heroes, the heroes being Shoto Todoroki and Kyoka Jiro. Kyoka walked to the cops and asked, "So, what happened? I thought there was a shootout." One of the cops turned and took a moment to remember the list of hero names they were given at the beginning of the day and addressed her. "Earphone Jax, good to see you, and yeah, we were in a shootout until he arrived." "He?" Kyoka asked incredulously. The other cop nodded. "Yup, tall guy in some sorta armored suit and cool car came in out of nowhere and took down all the guys inside." Kyoka turned the criminal androids being taken into a police SWAT truck to take them down to the police station. She then turned to the warehouse. "Damn, Igenium sure is fast, but isn't he in the command center with Yaomomo and Kendo?" she asked Shoto. "I may be fast, but if it took you 15 minutes to get there, I am nowhere close enough to get there before you," Iida admitted, "and I don't own a car, and even if I did, my parents would never let me bring it into this exam." Shoto hummed before turning to the officers. "Can you tell us more about this guy and his car?" The officers nodded and went into detail about the Batman. To say the two heroes in training were shocked would be an understatement, as they now understood that it wasn't Iida but someone else, and this person was the secret part of the exam and now knew partially what to expect. After saying their thanks to the two officers, the two heroes left the scene and headed back to their patrol pattern. Later they would finish up and meet up with the other hero students to discuss their patrols and anything of interest. Each team gave their story on what they did, from the more tame patrols like Pony and Kota, who helped some kids and saved a cat from a tree, to the more combat-oriented patrols like Bakugo and Kirishima. However, it was apparent that Batman had crossed paths with heroes more than once that night, causing them all to figure that he was the mystery component and would talk more about it the following morning. The rest of the night went off without a hitch, with the last of the patrols being done by 11:30 p.m. and returning. Afterwards, they all did the small amount of paperwork for the day and went to bed, since they had already scheduled the next day's patrols and patterns. But for our main protagonist, this was not the end, and instead was just the beginning of his legend. "I better hope so. He truly is a legend among legends," Miriko said with a large grin as her foot started to tap very quickly in excitement. With the heroes and guest group. "Holy fucking shit, this is so badass," yelled the fanboying Mirko, who was shaking Ryoko rapidly. "Agreed, future, I agreed," Miriko said with a large grin on her face as she too was fanboying about Midoriya. She got into her friend's face while still shaking her before excitedly speaking, "Did you see that, Ryu? He was like vroom, scree, I'm Batman." And then got into the building to kick major ass. "Our Rumi st, stop shaking me." Ryoko gave her friend a tiny annoyed glare on her face. Rumi heard this and looked around at everyone who was staring at her, stopped what she was doing and let her best friend go with a blush. She coughed into her fist to compose herself. "Well, can you blame me? The dude is badass, I can't help if he gets my blood pumping." "Shut up," Miriko glared with a blush, seeing the people giving her amused looks. Miss Joke laughed at the bunny woman while leaning into Aizawa's side. "Ha. Mirko has a crush." Rumi froze and grew a tick mark on her forehead as she leapt out of her seat and lunged at the comedic hero. "Say that again, I dare you." Emmy gives Miriko a smirk as the said rabbit was being held down by you to stop Miriko from jumping her. Before the situation got out of hand, the HPSC president coughed, getting everyone's attention. It took them all a moment to focus on her, but when she knew she had their focus on her, she spoke. Miss Usagiyama, please refrain from hurting your fellow heroes. I believe we have much more to discuss when it comes to what we have been watching so far. Not that your relationship with this young man isn't interesting, but I'd rather hear about that later. Rumi gave one last scowl at Miss Joke, then turned and walked back to her seat, where she dropped into it with crossed arms. What's there to talk about? The Batman is doing great and the kids are doing okay so far. Emmy had a victorious smirk on her face. Midnight, at hearing this, started explaining her view on the matter. I agree, but the fact is Izuku had some better than expected and the other students have made a grave error in judgment already. Hearing this made some of the non-heroes raise an eyebrow, but it was David who asked the question on their minds. What do you mean? To me, it seems they didn't do anything out of the ordinary. Melissa and David nodded in agreement, being the only civilians in the theater, as they agreed with their future selves as they were confused. The others looked at David before turning to Nezu, who had a smile. Oh, that's quite easy to answer, so why don't I ask you a question instead? David blinked before nodding. Sure, ask away. Nezu's smile glinted in the light as he became even more joyous. To put it simply, how many of the hero students are sleeping or going to bed? David's eyes widened before he facepalmed. Oh, I see now, he said. What do you mean we did everything perfectly? Monoma said in his snarky voice before he was chopped by Kendo. You will see soon, was all the quirkless man said. The quirkless man squinted his eyes at the strange question before his face became that of shock and then disbelief. You've gotta be kidding me. Nezu laughed. It seems you've realized what I was getting at, so why don't you answer for those who still haven't gotten it yet? David facepalmed and dragged his hand over his face. Okay, well, to put it bluntly, the hero studently forgot that they needed to do nightly patrols into the morning and then switch to a different group who would take the morning shifts. In all, it's a basic rookie mistake that many don't think about that often due to the focus on limelight heroes who are out from morning to late evening. The said student's face turned red in embarrassment. At this, everyone did their reaction to the hero student's mistake. The teachers sighed and mentally noted to add this to their notes for the end of the exercise talk. Meanwhile, the guests facepalmed or shook their heads. It was then thought that the resident pink-haired mecha maniac had a lightbulb flash atop her head as a thought crossed her mind. May hummed, getting the attention of Power Loader and the shields. Power Loader started searing and gulped, wondering if he should ask or not, but in the end, his curiosity took the better of him. Said hero was also worried was going on in her mind. Hatsume, what's on your mind, and should I be worried? May just hummed louder, getting the other participants in the room to look at her, and it was only when Nezu approached her and asked what the problem was that they got the answer to what was on her mind. Say, if they aren't going out to fight crime and prevent bad stuff from happening tonight, and all those crimes that are programmed to do so are still going to happen to simulate a real city, doesn't that mean Muscles will have to be the one to pick up all the slack until the hero students wake up around 7 to 8 hours from now? He will do just that. All Might admitted as they nodded in agreement. Everyone became very worried. Quote. 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 Fuck, said Toshinori as he knew his successor would do just that. Oh, calm down guys, Midoriya is going to be fine. From what we've seen him do so far with his martial arts and gadgets as well as how he operates so far, he acts like a complete professional, so give the little listener some credit, said Present Mike. Like my future self said he will be fine, Present Mike, as the students calmed down. Aizawa just glared at his longtime friend before considering his words. Yes, Midoriya was seemingly doing well, but that can all change at a moment's notice and he had all night for that to change. Aizawa nodded himself as the others just got more worried. So begrudgingly he stopped glaring and let out a tired sigh. We'll have to wait and see, since that's all we can do right now, and hope that the students realize their mistake before it gets out of hand. A solemn atmosphere shrouded the room, but one person felt it the worst. This was none other than Melissa, who clenched her fist and hoped the situation Izuku was in would get better sooner than later. She also felt anticipation bubble in her stomach, hoping that Izuku could show her that someone like her without a quirk could truly become a hero like she had wished when she was younger. Please prove me wrong, Izu, Melissa thought to himself. Melissa didn't notice it, but her father and Toshinori had seen her emotional state and could sympathize, since they were each wondering if Izuku could prove their past selves wrong as well and show them that it could be done, that someone without a superpower could be a hero. The principal had told those who wanted to rest for the night to go to their assigned rooms. He would be providing them, which some did, but the more curious stayed to watch Izuku work. With the hero students, it was official, Kyoka Jiro couldn't sleep. And no matter how many times she turned or adjusted her pillow, her mind would just not calm itself and allow her to slip into the realm of sleep. So with a grunt she sat up and got out of her bed. The girls had agreed to stay up a bit for a slumber party with the assistance of Mina, Toru, and the splitting from 2B Setsuna. This meant that Kyoka had to step around the girls who were asleep on the floor and try not to wake any of them. She did this without a hitch until she exited the large female side common room and walked to their kitchen for a drink. But on turning the corner to the kitchen she meets up with her best friend and love rival Momo Yaoyorozu, Yaomomo. "Kyoka, what are you doing up this late? I could have sworn you were asleep already," said the heiress. Kyoka shrugged. "Nah, I've been awake for a while. I couldn't sleep, so I came to get a drink or something. What about you?" Momo blushed and rubbed her arm. "Well, I actually just got off a call with Midoriya and was coming back from doing so," said Ravenette, starting to blush a bit. The punk girl narrowed her eyes slightly before becoming smug. "Oh, I could have sworn you were about to say Izuku's given name for a second there. Are you sure you don't have feelings for him?" If possible, her face turned even redder. Momo's face turned red as she stammered, "Tu didn't. And even if I did, I would have no idea how to express those feelings or even know what to do about you and the other girls who have feelings for him." Kyoka paused before she quirked an eyebrow. "Wait, who else has feelings for Green?" "I know I told you about my feelings for Green. I know I told you about my feelings for him, and everyone and their mother knows about Uraraka, but who else is interested in him?" "WWWID, Uraraka stuttered. "You not fooling anyone, everyone knows about your crush on him," Jiro said with a flat voice as everyone nodded and Uraraka's face turned red. The heiress froze like she had been frozen in place. Her eyes darted around for an escape but found none, so with a deep sigh she caved and her shoulders dragged. "To put it frankly, every girl in our class, I'm pretty sure all the girls in 2B, definitely Midnight and probably Mirko, and I did notice the pussycat give Izuku the same looks you and I throw at him when he isn't looking." "Midoriya, you lucky bastard," Mineta shouted out. "Damn, what are your thoughts on polyamory relationships?" said Kyoka, twirling her jack around her index finger in thought. Thump. Momo fainted with steam pouring from her ears and dropped to the floor in a heap, leaving Kyoka to smirk and say, "Oh, the future is going to be so much fun. Wonder if that quirk of Izuku's gives him stamina in bed. It helps with exercise as he outlasts all of us in gym and hero exercises. Thoughts for later, I suppose." Jiro smirked as Momo's face turned even redder and cue Mineta yelling out again in jealousy. She looked down at her unconscious friend and sighed. "Well, it's get her to bed so I can get a drink when I'm done." With a huff, the petite girl picked her best friend up and grunted in exertion. "Holy crap, she's heavy. Cammy, I know she said she was dense from her quirk, but she must weigh over 200 pounds, and still looks like a goddess." Momo pouted at that. It wasn't her fault, her quirk affected her fat cells as many chuckled. Kyoka carried Momo to her bed, which took a lot more effort and time than she thought it would, and by the end of it didn't get a drink, just laid in bed with the heiress before passing out with her. What they didn't know was that a certain green-haired girl with shark teeth heard it all and smirked with a smile that would make the rat god himself proud. "Ooh, my, I didn't know Izuku had so many fans besides those in my class," said Setsuna while in her green dinosaur onesie and lying across from Kendo. She took a glance at her classmates before smirking harder. "I do wonder if polyamory will work between us all," as Kyoka seemed to have alluded to. "Guess only time will tell." "Setsuna, go to fucking sleep or I'll pour my mushroom spores down your throat," came the voice of Kanoko Komori. The dino girl shivered at the threat and returned her ear back to her head and thought to herself, "In the future, don't piss off Kanoko no matter what." The others also slightly shivered, especially the two from 1B. It was now morning, around 5:15 a.m. give or take. Izuku didn't pay that much mind through as his body was aching and his mind was tired from all the work he had done that night. From robbery, muggings, and carjackings, Izuku had stopped them all, and that was without mentioning the various robotic villains he encountered during his patrol. But with the sun rising into the sky, he could tell crime would start slowing down with the hero students getting up and about. This would have to do for now though, because Izuku was turning it in for the night. Izuku was perched on a gargoyle looking over the city. That was until he attached his grapple hook to the stone statue and jumped off, running down the building and landing softly next to the Batmobile. With a flick of his wrist the hook came down and he clicks his hand on his opposing gauntlet, causing the car to start itself automatically. Getting inside the muscle car a second later, Izuku drove off down alleys and into a tunnel system that would lead him to the Batcave, rolling up to the spot where the car originally was parked and exited. Once out of the car he walked to the gadget wall to place down his gear and took off his cowl while he was at it. With a long sigh he placed his utility belt down on the table and sat down on a cargo crate. Many frowned at this, knowing that Izuku stayed up all night to take down the criminals, as many students mentally berated themselves for not thinking about night crimes and causing Izuku to go out all night to deal with the crimes. What a rough night. At least it went off without too many problems. Although no backup for all the nightly crime was terrible, all I can say is I'm disappointed in them for not thinking ahead enough. As Izuku was saying this, the hero course students looked down. Letting out another sigh, Izuku stood up and started taking off his armor. The armored plates fell to the floor with a clang and the undersuit followed closely after getting strapped over the crate he was just on. When the last of his bat suit was off, Izuku was completely naked. He didn't bother putting clothes on and instead went towards the shower to clean the sweat and grime off of his body. He entered the shower stall he had set up the other day and turned the knob to release the cold water that slowly climbed to a warmer temperature. He didn't shiver under the cold and instead embraced it as it loosened his muscles. All of the girls except Emmy and Recovery Girl watched this with large blushes as Midnight kept licking her lips and some had their faces completely red. Once it became warm, his muscles relaxed and he felt the knots in his back unwind as much as they could. He let out a smooth breath, feeling the water calm his racing mind. The iceberg needs to be investigated. I used that project I was nearly finished with since it works best for this situation. I'll have to finish it later today and test it out. I wonder what his next gadget is going to be like. Power Loader said usually May would comment on this, but she was too focused on looking at Izuku's body that was being soaked with water as drool came out of hers and few other girls' mouths. He stayed soaking in the shower for a bit longer before turning it off and getting out, grabbing a towel that was next to the shower stall he used to dry off. Some spare clothes he had pre-packed beforehand were next to the makeshift bed that he changed into. They were simple long-sleeve black shirts with some breathable leggings. Mommy approves, Midnight said, still in a lustful haze, looking at Izuku's body as the girls nodded in agreement. I pray for your survival, Midoriya, Izu bro, the boys thought. That lucky bastard, it should be me who is in this situation, not Midoriya. Why? Mineta said as he was mentally crying. The outfit wasn't much, but it was comfortable, which was all Izuku cared about after spending hours in a hot and heavy combat suit all night and beating up robotic enemies. Before he could go to bed, he had one last thing he needed to do. He took his phone that was next to his bed and smiled at seeing the contact info of Momo Yaoyorozu, his class vice president and close friend who he may or may not be crushing on. Momo blushed at this but smiled and the girls growled in jealousy. Tapping the message icon, he remembered his phone call that night during a break he was having. Momo had called him wishing him a good night and to talk like they usually do. Flashback. Izuku had fully adopted the Batman persona as he went from crime scene to crime scene. However, right now he was taking a short break to catch his breath and look up the GCPD's crime report system. That's good, at least he took a single break, Iida commented with a frown of worry for his friend as most nodded with him in agreement. Yes, despite the fact I would like him to take more than one break, one would be better than none, Aizawa said. It was as he looked through the list of reported crimes that his phone that he incorporated into his cowl started to ring. His eyes still actively searching the list, didn't hesitate to tap his earpiece under his cowl to answer. Nice addition, that way he doesn't need to worry about getting out his phone or his phone going off in a serious situation, Snipe said in approval. Yes, I need to ask Problem Child to give me some of this tech, Aizawa said, then mumbled to himself, and a few pro heroes said their agreements with this. Hello. The feminine voice of Momo Yaoyorozu came from the other side, at first catching Izuku off guard, but he quickly composed himself. Less than hello is Midoriya-kun. I know it's pretty late, but I was hoping to talk to you if you weren't too busy. Greater than. Isuku noted the shy tone in her voice and smiled gently as she responded, "Sure Momo, and I believe I've told you before that it's fine to call me Izuku." Momo gained a dark blush due to this and the girls grumbled. He could hear the heiress squeak on the other side of the phone and she stammered less than two, "Okay, Izuku-kun. I was wondering how your day with Gran Torino-san has been. Greater than." The greenette felt a shiver go down his spine hearing the name of Torino. Thankfully he was able to respond in a normal calm manner. All Might had the same reaction to his successor and the said man smirked at how both users of One for All were afraid of him. "It's been rough, he hasn't let me sleep yet and I don't know when he will. To be honest, I think he is trying to teach me something about not using myself too far, but I could very easily be wrong." Momo giggles and says, "Less than that sounds like something he would do from what you've told me and the others about him. I won't take too much of your time as I'm sure Torino won't let it slide lightly, so be careful, and stay out of trouble Izuku." Greater than. Izuku snorts at this, "You're making it sound like I get into trouble often." The heiress doesn't say anything for a few moments until she finally responds, "Less than do I have to list all the times you've encountered villains without even looking for them? Because I will if need be." Greater than. The greenette pouts under his cowl, "I'm not that bad, but yes, I guess I should get back to it. Good night Momochan, sleep well." Everyone who knew Midoriya had blank looks on their faces and was thinking how that was not true at all. "Less than G, good night to you as well my good night." Greater than. She quickly hung up after saying his, causing Izuku to tilt his head in confusion. Momo's face exploded into a new shade of red at how embarrassed she felt. Single quote ... Was she about to say, "My love"? Probably not. That would be ridiculous. Unless, thoughts for later and not when I'm doing a very physically taxing activity. Aizawa nodded in approval. With that Izuku finished his break and went to the nearest crime that had been reported, which just so happened to be a muggening in an alley, a small family being cornered by a man with a gun. Izuku's Batman persona came back out as he glared from underneath his cowl. Time to get to work. He hopped into the action, taking the man down and pulling him into the shadows, leaving the family shocked and grateful as they ran from the alley. Flashback end. To say Izuku still felt his heart warm up at remembering his talk with Momo was an understatement. It made him feel like he had a miniature sun in his chest that was all warm and tingly. The said heiress had a smile on that and a tad bit of a darker blush even as she tried to calm it down. His smile didn't falter at all as he texted Momo that he was just now going to bed and that he hoped she had a great day and did well on the exam. He even sent a little emoji. Thumbs up. Was he being an idiot and maybe slightly flirting with her? Probably, but he didn't spend months researching how to talk to women. He trained and researched to fight and thinking like a hero, not some skirt chaser. "Good, we don't need a new Mineta," Asui said as Mineta cried out about how he could get a new comrade. Asui slapped him with her tongue. So with the text sent, he put his phone down and laid down for bed, closing his eyes shortly after he drifted off to sleep in an instant, showing just how tired he was. Not knowing just how his text had affected the Ravenet that equally held feelings for him, but that would be found out sooner rather than later. Inside the Hero Building HQ, Momo had woken up earlier as per usual. She yawned and rubbed her eyes as she got out of her bed and noticed her best friend Kyoka was also there in bed with her. The raven-haired girl reached over to her phone to check the time and saw she was up around 6 a.m. She also saw that she received a text from her crush Izuku. She opened it and smiled so bright she could outshine the sun, and her heart felt so joyous she wanted to squeal in delight, but she rested her hand on her chest and took a deep breath to relax. She hummed happily before getting some clothes so she could take a morning shower. She did just that and returned to her room a little later to see Kyoka was still dead asleep on her bed where she had last saw her. Rolling her eyes, the Ravenet shook her friend to wake her up. "Kyoka, it's 6:30 and we need to start getting ready for early morning patrols." Kyoka groaned and her jacks poked Momo's hands trying to get them away, but they had no strength in them. Lightly tapped Momo's skin. "Don't wanna leave me," mumbled out the purple-haired girl. A few cooed and chuckled at how cute she was when asleep as the said girl blushed deeply. The rich girl smiled a little at her friend and leaned forward into her ear. "I'll make you coffee and some French toast. With cut-up banana." "Yes, Kyoka, with cut-up banana." replied Momo, who had a large smile at how cute her friend was being. Cue some more chuckles as Jiro poked the closed person who was doing that, and unlucky for the person it was Toru. Shifting in the bed, Kyoka looked up towards Momo and spoke. I'll get in the shower, but better get me French toast and banana when I get to the kitchen table. Momo booed her on the nose. I promise, now get up while I go cook. Kyoka got up without another word and Momo left for the kitchen area to make the food she had promised Kyoka while also making some for herself. It was about 15 minutes later that Kyoka arrived and sat down at the kitchen table where Momo set her food down. The perplete drank a large sip of coffee and exhaled in utter relaxation before she dug into her food. The two ate their breakfast with the other girls arriving to join them a little later, some making their breakfast or a simple bowl of cereal. The morning was rather quiet, which was nice, but they all knew they would be having a rougher day with the test going full swing on their first full day of working since arriving. It didn't take long for everyone to finish getting dressed in their hero costumes and meet up with the rest of the hero students inside the main office area. Sitting at the head of the large table, Kendo spoke to everyone gathered. All right everyone, I know we talked about our patrols last night, but I want to make sure everyone knows about anything of interest. We've talked about Batman, but what else did anyone else find while on patrol? What ensured was each group of students explaining the things they noticed, from the mayor election being held in a few days to the more mundane like certain buildings of interest like the hospital or the water treatment plant. Behind Kendo was a large map of the city. The redhead had circled locations and wrote what they were as the students mentioned them: the hospital, Hero HQ, power plant, water treatment, and even the promising businesses were now listed in the map. Okay, anyone else has anything to say or mention, maybe even a question someone has for me? Asked Kendo, looking around the room. The two classes were quiet, also looking around to see if anyone had something to say. It was right then that Momo stood up and spoke. I have something to say actually. Good job Momo for fixing the main issue so quickly, Nezu said with a smile, already knowing what she was going to say. Thank you, Principal, Momo said with a small smile on her face. Kendo nodded at her second in command and let her proceed. Momo took the papers with the patrol patterns and schedules all planned from the night before and started to shift through them. I didn't piece it together yesterday, but after a long night of not being able to sleep I found what was nagging at me when we first made out patrols the other day, said the vice president of Class 1A. Most perked up at hearing this, leaning in wondering what they had missed. Kendo was one of them, thinking they had done everything perfectly and wondered what Momo was getting at. Momo looked up from the papers and pointed out the flaw she saw. I will ask one question to you all and hope you get what I'm trying to get at, so here goes. Who patrols after 10:30 p.m.? The obnoxious voice of Monoma responded to this from the other side of the table from Momo. Well, obviously no one. That's well after we all end our patrols for the night. The disappointed look of Vlad was directed right at his student, making him slightly shift in his seat. The Ravenet nodded to the blonde. Exactly. While we sleep all night, no one is patrolling through the night, leaving the city defenseless because we are all asleep. Quote. Oh, was all Monoma could say, now nowhere near as smug as before. Multiple members of 1A chucked at this. It was nice seeing Monoma being put down a peg or two. Kendo sighed and rested her face in her hand at such maniple mistakes, with others doing the same. I see the problem now, and from here on we will have to restructure our patrols to make up for this. Momo nodded and took a different piece of paper that she received from the police at the docks last night. She took the papers out and handed them to Kendo, who looked them over. These were at the docks where villains were apprehended by Batman. They were transporting chemicals, and these papers have a very particular place on them I find to be odd, Momo pointed out. The redhead leader of the group hummed, and turning to the map, one of the businesses she had listed earlier stuck out to her as they were on the papers as a sending address. So these chemicals were being moved and came from the Iceberg Lounge. I want a full team with reconnaissance to watch that place, and Iida, I want you to talk to a judge to get a warrant to monitor the place as well as a warrant to search the building and any room inside, ordered Kendo. Who wants to bet Midoriya bro will get to them first? Kirishima asked. That is a sucker bet, Kiri, even I know that, Denki said to his best friend, making the redhead shrug. The group compiled and the teams were formed for the recon team, and the new patrol routes were planned. The new plan of action was one team would go in the daytime and the other would go at night, with spare Tesmirsers at HQ for backup and resting when they can. In the observation room, Aizawa sighed in relief at the problem from yesterday being handled so quickly. He couldn't help himself from thinking of how tired his problem child had looked when returning to his hideout before the cameras turned off. "So you do like him," Emi said smugly. "Shut up," was all Aizawa said, not going to deny or agree with her. Of course, even with the main monitor of his hideout turning off, Nezu for some odd reason felt obliged to give Miriko an iPad with the live feed still on and headphones wired to said iPad. Aizawa almost felt bad for his problem child but didn't want to get in the way of Mirko, Nimori, Melissa, and May. Cammy only knew how badly it would have turned out for him if he had. "May you survive the horny girls." All the men couldn't help but think to Midoriya in a prey-like passion. Spoken of the girls in the room, Midnight had a bloody nose and was panting heavily, and Mirko was blushing and staring at the iPad without blinking while the two mechanic maniacs were talking nose and whispering to themselves. "He's not going to survive long after we get out of here," Denki whispered to his friends near him, and they all nodded in agreement. The tired teacher shook his head at this and returned to looking at the main monitor that showed his students with Khan's students working well together in getting permission to watch the nightclub. "You think they'll do good in this? I don't know if my kids are up to snuff when it comes to stealth operations besides Setsuna, but even when she's a little noticeable when it comes to her detached eye floating midair." Aizawa turned to Vladkind and huffed, "They'll be fine, and I bet your kids will be too." Vlad laughed at this. "That's some encouraging wastes coming from you of all people, but maybe it's from a change in your relationships." Aizawa glared but didn't regulate the vampire words, making the teacher of 1B smile in victory. Said teacher glared at the vampire teacher of 1B in annoyance, making him shift in his seat. The two teachers sat in silence, one of which was being snuggled up into by a green-haired woman with cat pajamas and a tired, lifeless expression as she recently woke up. It appeared that Miss Joke wasn't much of a morning person either, and Aizawa wouldn't admit it to anyone, but her tired face mixed with bedhead was rather cute in his eyes, and the pajamas were a bonus. Emi had a large smile on her face at this, and Aizawa wasn't going to look at her during this. All Might or Toshinori was watching the students with pride. Even with their mistakes they acknowledged them quickly and fixed it just quick. All Might had a large smile on his face. "Good job, young ones," All Might said with a large smile on his face, and his students felt better at the fact that the former number one hero congratulated them. And then there was Midoriya. His successor had done lots of work the night before and dare he say showed he could work very well as an underground hero even while quirkless. Aizawa smirked at this, pleased at what his problem child was like as an underground teacher. It sparked pride that burned brightly in his soul. If he still had one, for all he would have said it was boosted by how inspired he felt by his successor. "Don't get too big of a head for how your kid is doing, Toshinori, or else your neck won't be able to lift that already large head of yours," remarked the senior hero Gran Torino. Many people chucked or outright laughed at this remark, making All Might frown slightly. Toshi frowned. "Why must you be so negative, sir?" Gran Torino quicker one of his eyes and crossed his arms. "I can say whatever I want, Brad. Besides, that kid put in most of the work to get where he is today, mister. Clench your butt cheeks and yell smash." "Wait, is that the advice you gave him?" Aizawa asked as Gran Torino nodded. No wonder he broke his bones so often, making All Might to look down. "I'm never going to hear the end of that, am I?" The elderly hero smirked. "Nope. And besides, you're only human and humans make mistakes." "Does that mean you make mistakes too, sir?" Toshi asked. But Torino shook his head. "I don't make mistakes, I make decisions that may hurt me in the end, but not mistakes." Toshi stared at his mentor for a solid minute before saying, "But is that the same to ouch?" "You deserved that, you brat," Gran Torino said. Torino smacked his blonde idiot of a student with his cane before huffing and going back to watching the younger generation of heroes during their training exercise. Time skip. The green-haired young man had gone to sleep and woke up hours later around 3 p.m. Once up and fully awake, he ate food and started working on his side project to help him get information on the Iceberg Lounge. The concept came to him a few weeks before when he was watching a old-school pre-Quirk era movie, and one of the devices the main protagonist used was a drone. Once Izuku saw it in action, he knew having one for himself would be incredibly helpful. So that was what he was doing for the day until he had to go out again. He had the drone built and wired but needed to code in the programming needed to control the drone via his gauntlet. "So cool, May," Melissa, and Power Loader shouted as Mei started to mumble about what it could do. Izuku was using some newly invented anti-gravity technology from Iceland that was published not that long ago. The idea Izuku had was a camera that could be unheard while it records and he could listen in while staking out criminal hideouts. The young adult tapped the keyboard of the Batcomputer while he programmed. It wasn't the most enjoyable of pastimes, but he didn't have much choice on the matter right now. But all of a sudden he felt a shiver run down his spine. He turned and looked around him but found nothing out of the ordinary. That felt ominous. Wonder if someone is thinking about me or something. The teen shook his head and got back to work, not knowing about the woman who had watched, rewatched, and was still watching the videos of him taking his clothes off and having a long shower. He'd only find out about his new perverted fan club. It was far too late. A couple of hours later. It was finished. The drone Izuku named the Bat was now complete and ready for his patrol, and with a quick look at the Batcomputer Izuku saw he would be out and in the city in a matter of hours. So with time remaining, Izuku checked all his gadgets, car, and suit for damage and or malfunctions. He could fix them now and not have to be in the field. He found some gadgets like his batarangs needed to be sharpened and his car needed to be refueled before he headed out, so he got to work after finding this out and corrected them. When the time came, Izuku got suited up and checked the GCPD police radio to monitor crime. It was a slow night so far until he heard a crime interest over the emergency radio. "This is Officer 365. We got a situation at the mayor's home. I repeat, we have a situation at the mayor's home. We've found a body and have identified it as Mayor Conroy." Izuku's eyes narrowed under his cowl as he looked at the Batcomputer, his mind wondering, is this the first big piece of Nezu's puzzle? "Most likely it is part of the exam," Smintos said as most of the teachers nodded in agreement. He didn't let his mind linger long as he went to the Batmobile and exited the Batcave to head towards the mayor's home. It was terrible in Shinso's opinion. He was in charge of quite a few people as a police detective in this exam and he hated it. He was used to not sleeping, but not sleeping due to paperwork and trying to piece together evidence in crimes was not his thing. The only good side to this was that he could join the hero course if he did well. Shinso groaned at this as a few people chucked at his misfortune. So even when he walked into Mayor Conroy's home where the man himself had died, he couldn't help but think of what if this was all real. What if he as an underground hero was here investigating? It wasn't pretty. The body was realistic and had what he could only guess was pig's blood covering the body to make it feel more real. A couple of the students had felt sick looking at it, especially with how the pig's blood would smell. Upon seeing the body, Shinso's partner commented, "What sort of sicko does something like this?" The short-haired girl with red hair looked up to Shinso as he replied to the inquiry, "A psychopath with an agenda." Shinso inspected the trapped head of the body with the words, "No more lies," and, upon looking around the room, noticed many photos of the mayor's past achievements with similarly written defaming words. Aizawa's eyes narrowed when he looked at it, especially with the duct tape that was around his face. "What are you planning, Nezu?" he thought to himself as he glanced toward his boss. Sighing, Shinso decided he needed to get some air before getting into all this shit. He addressed his partner Kiori and walked up the stairs and through the roof access door. Shinso nodded in agreement with his future self as he would need to take a breath before he continued. Standing in the rain wasn't healthy, but the purple-haired teen playing detective didn't care. He just stood taking sips of his coffee while thinking the situation over. That was until a sound from behind him alerted him to someone's presence. His head shot to the figure and Shinso was surprised. Batman. The tall, intimidating figure of the city's vigilante looked over Shinso, and then he spoke in a dead serious tone, "Detective Shinso, we need to talk." "So cool, he looks impressive, especially with the shadows mostly hiding his appearance along with the rain," Midnight said with a smile, and most of the people agreed. Shinso gulped, unsure how to respond, but did so anyway. "What is it you need of me?" Batman stepped off the roof and right in front of Shinso. He then stood up and answered, "I need to get inside and inspect the mayor. If this is what I believe it to be, then this is the first main event of this exam." The rain continued to pelt the two and Shinso thought it over in his head. The mayor's death so close to the end of the election was suspicious already, but how he died made it all the more clear that this, Batman, was right. With a sigh, Shinso nodded, "Fine, but no funny business, and tell me everything you find while in there." All of the pro-heroes nodded in agreement. Good choice Shinso, as I can say that he will be able to help you very well, present Mike. And on top of that, I have to say that Midoriya is one of the smartest people in the school. Cementos added his option, getting Nezu to agree with him. As long as no one attacks me I will stay passive. Now tell me what you know, the Batman ordered. Sighing again, Shinso did just that as they entered the building and headed down toward the body. The cops inside froze at seeing the vigilante and were completely off guard as Shinso explained the situation to said vigilante. One officer tried to stop them, but with an order from Shinso the officer stepped back and let them enter the main room where the mayor laid. Almost immediately Izuku aka the Batman noticed the tap, the wording, and the graffiti all over the pictures. Very good taking in everything, especially in a situation like this, Aizawa said with approval. Humming in thought, Izuku took out his hacking tool and used the camera to take pictures of the wall of the mayor's achievements and the mayor himself. It was also then that one of the other detectives called out to Shinso. This was his partner Kiori, who had a letter grasped in her gloved hands. "Sir, we got something." Shinso turned along with Izuku was stared at the letter. On the letter in bold was, "To the Batman." Written on it. "Does this mean anything to you, Batman?" Shinso asked inquisitively. But Izuku didn't ask and instead took the letter that was handed out to him. He used a batarang to open it and read the contents aloud. "Who I am is the question, what you do matters most. But that is not the matter at hand. You will find me with my thumb of knowledge, so seek me out if you must. Let's play a game, you and I, for this city will be drowned in chaos. You may call me the Riddler, for you, my friend, are on your path to find me. My first riddle in this, what does a liar do when dead? Why am I not surprised at all that Nezu is challenging our intelligence?" Momo asked with a tiny sweat drop. "Because that is exactly what he would do," Aizawa said. "But what does the riddle mean?" Satoru asked, confused, as a good portion of the class nodded in agreement. "It means he lies still," Momo said, getting a smile from Nezu and an O from her classmates. Underneath these words were symbols used when the riddle was solved. Izuku looked up to the quiet room and spotted Shinso deep in thought. Shinso looked up to the vigilante and asked, "What does a liar do when dead? What kind of bullshit is this?" Shinso nodded in agreement. He hated riddles, especially if he was going to have to solve it for a murder. Izuku and Kiyomi didn't respond as another voice answered instead. "That's what I'm wondering, Detective Shinso. What the hell is a vigilante doing in my crime scene?" Everyone turned to the main entrance where the commissioner was standing with a small group of heroes behind him, who when seeing Batman why died. The group consisted of Momo, Iida, Uraraka and Mina. Izuku looked at them, assessing them for danger to himself, and formed a plan of attack and retreat. "Good job. You don't know if you can trust them or not yet," Aizawa said with a nod as many nodded in agreement. But this was not needed as Shinso spoke up. "He's here to help," and was addressed directly by the maniac who did this. "So sorry, Commissioner, but this is a high priority as of now." The commissioner glared and was about to yell once again, but was stopped by Momo. "Sir, stop this nonsense and let up get to work. If the Batman needs to be here, then so be it. Good job in talking sense into him. Despite our reputation, some officers still don't like to work with us as we can cause more collateral damage or just interfere with an investigation," Aizawa said, as that was another reason he preferred to work as an underground hero, as Momo smiled at her teacher. The room was surprised to hear this, but did as the female heroine ordered. Even the commissioner begrudgingly accepted the order but continued to glare at the vigilante, playing his part as a strict police commissioner well. Momo with trepidation walked to Shinso and Batman, greeting the two. "Greetings, Detective and Batman, it's an honor to meet you." Izuku didn't respond, even though it hurt him to ignore his crush like this, but acting detached to not make the connection between himself and Batman was needed here. Momo slightly smiled at this. The Ravenette frowned at not getting a response, but this didn't deter her any bit as she addressed Shinso. "Detective, what's the situation?" The purple-haired teen sighed and went over the details, from the body of the mayor to how he met Batman on the roof and his idea of this being the first of Nezu's obstacles to capture this mystery killer. "That's a quick but very good summary," Nezu summarized. Momo and the other heroes agreed to this, and Iida looked over the letter with Momo after it was handed to them by Izuku. Iida mimicked the letter word by word. Many chuckled or outright laughed at Iida's antics. "So this Riddler character wants us to find him by using riddles he leaves behind. I can see these getting out of hand sooner rather than later," Momo commented. She then looked at the body and noticed the hand of the mayor. His thumb has been cut off. Do we think he was tortured before he was killed? No. Nezu and many raised their eyebrows, or well, in Cementos and the power loader raised it underneath his helmet or raised an invisible one. The group turned to Batman, who was delivering the letter. No, he wasn't tortured. The way the cut was made and how the hand was found show signs of rigor mortis before the thumb was cut off. In other words, the digit was removed well after he had died. The handprints on the neck show he was strangled to death, but the wound on the back of his head also shows signs of a tool being used to knock him to the ground. Drag's marks on the floor indicate this as well. Very good, those are signs that anyone dealing with a murder should see the difference between a person being tortured to death or having body parts being cut off after death. Aizawa said in approval. As an underground couch, he has seen some truly fucked up shit. I see. Then the riddle? Asked Momosho, as increasingly intrigued by the masked man. The answer is, he lies still, answered the Batman. Good job, but this will be the simplest one to answer, Nezu said. The group nodded along to this, and Uravati aka Uraraka asked, so, the symbols go to the letters in the answer. What do we get after that then? Izuku hummed and his mind raced. It goes into this word scramble at the bottom of the letter. I've been decoding it while you all talked. What it says is this. This man had lied day after day, putting tax dollars into his prized possessions. Leaving the poor and hungry to fight, this bastard would drive by. Most of the pro-heroes have an idea starting to form what Nezu had in store for the exam. The heroes and detectives rubbed their chins at this, unsure what it meant. Once again Batman was asked to hit it all meant, and this time it was Shinso who did so. Got any idea what that could mean? Because I got nothing, the purple-haired detective said with a tired sigh. You and me both, my future self, Shinso said. Izuku nodded and used his gauntlet computer to access the mayor's listed owned properties, and after a few minutes of diffing, he found what he needed. Turning and walking towards the front door, Izuku brushed past the group and surrounding cops. This, however, caused Momo to shout, "Wait, where are you going?" Izuku stopped but didn't turn around to address the young woman. The mayor owned a garage nearby where he kept his expensive vehicles he bought using the city's tax money. That's where we'll find our next clue. Very good, Midoriya, Gran Torino said with his head nod, as All Might smiled that his successor got praised by his mentor, which is very hard to do at all. With another tap of his gauntlet, the Batmobile came roaring down the street, and stopping dead away from the armored man, he swiftly opened the door and entered. So cool, Koda yelled out in amazement with huge stars in his eyes as most of the students nodded in agreement. This, however, was enough time for Momo and Uraraka to get to the car and open it, making Izuku turn and raise an eyebrow at their action as they both piled in, Momo sitting the seat with Uraraka sitting on her lap. A couple chucked at this, knowing the car was really only a two-person's car. Care to explain what you're doing? Izuku asked. Momo, and Uraraka turned to him with the Ravenet replied. We're coming with you, of course, and we need to keep an eye on you. Izuku sat staring at them for a few moments until he caved. Fine, but don't touch anything, and just know any tracker you plant in here will be found and destroyed before you can track me. Momo pouted cutely at this. Does anyone think anyone will get his mask off by the time the exam is over? Iida asked. It's highly unlikely, Iida, Shoto said to one of his friends. The tall woman at this and lifted a hand with a tracker device in it and pocketed it in her suit. Fine, but we will find out who you are, Batman, one way or another. The armored bat didn't respond to this and instead pushed on the gas, making the car fly down the road and toward the garage. A little bit behind them were Mina, Iida, Shinso, and Kiori. The male hero of the group asked the police duo, do either of you have a car? They both shook their heads and had to flag down another officer with a car who could take them to where Batman was heading with the girls. Time skip. The Batmobile screeched to a halt in front of the elevator leading down into the garage of the mayor. The three exited the armored muscle car and walked to the elevator. Izuku inspected the elevator to see an electronic keypad lock. Not seeing it as much of a problem, he took out his hacking device again and started hacking into it. I need to see that baby, Mei muttered to herself. It was while he was hacking that Mina, Iida, Shinso, and Kiori had caught up and were brought up to speed on the situation. So this is the place, right? Asked Kiori. Shinso nodded as he typed away at his phone. That's what I found in our database and it fits with what Batman has claimed. The elevator keypad dinged and it changed to a green color as the door shifted and peeled back to let them enter. Izuku stood up from his spot and entered the elevator with the others joining him. The door closed behind them and Izuku pushed the button to the bottom level. The elevator shook, causing Momo to fall into Izuku, who caught her. "Are you all right?" he asked. Momo blushed and nodded, feeling oddly warm under the collar and a sense of familiarity with the man's hands around her. Momo, just like her future self, blushed highly and smiled that her crush caught her. But before she could ponder this more, the elevator door opened again to show the garage. It was filled with classic and high-end cars. "I am not surprised at all by this," Aizawa said with a sigh. It was too expensive and high for him. "What are the chances he used the city money for the cars?" Kendo asked curiously. 98% Kendo, her teacher Vlad kind answered, making her nod along with the other students, as there was little chance of the mayor using his own money. Izuku walked ahead of the group, looking between the cars with the other inspecting them each more closely. Near the end of the cars, Izuku stopped and walked to the car in front of him. Shinso noted his and waved the others to join him. They all walked over to Batman and saw him open the door and inspect the inside. "What are you doing? Why are you searching his car in particular?" Uraraka asked, confused by the Vigilante's actions. Batman stopped for a moment and turned to face the girls before pointing to the back tire. "There, that's the tool used to remove the mayor's finger." "Very good." Quickly analysis of the room, Nezu said with a smile. "As expected from Midoriya," Shoto said with a smile. "Huh, nice deduction," commented Mina, who was unsure of how to feel about the whole situation. Izuku didn't respond as he went back to look inside the car. When he made it to the armrest glove box, he found what he was looking for. Lifting his hand with the item, narrowed his eyes and turned to show the group a thumb drive. Many students deadpanned. "All right, this guy has to be a jokester," Shoji said. "How could you joke about something like this? It's our exam," Iida said, horrified, with his arms moving like a robot. "Iida-kun, it's a thumb drive. The killer cut off the thumb," Uraraka said with a slight chuckle. Mina rolled her eyes. "Is this guy some sort of jokester of something?" Iida gasped at hearing this. "Ashido-san, this is serious business. Our exam is important and we must treat it seriously. First of all, you're supposed to call me by my hero name while on duty. And second of all, come on, it's a thumb drive, for crying out loud." Momo and Uraraka sighed at the two fighting over being serious right now, and they both turned to see the Batman plugging the drive into a computer given to him by Shinso. Typing into the computer to access the drive caused the screen to turn black and green. It appeared to be an old-school chat room of some sort with a question written on it. "Did you like my first riddle, Batman?" Izuku glared and typed in response, "No. Single quote ... Too bad, because we have a few more before we're done now. The second riddle is this: I inspire hope and faith. The flood washed away our sins, my body cracked and broken, it is my word against yours, but who will the people believe when the second Genesis arrives?" The group, including Izuku, was lost on this. It was too vague to be answered just yet. Nezu smiled at this. "I wonder how long it will take for you to solve it." As many looked at their principal, boss worried. And it appeared this was on purpose, as the computer screen showed a time that was slowly ticking down. They had 24 hours to answer the question. Izuku continued to glare at the screen before he stepped back and walked back towards the elevator. Shinso called out to him, "Hey, where are you going now?" Without stopping this time, Izuku got into the elevator and replied as he pushed the button, "I have another thing to look into tonight. We have 24 hours to find the right answer, but we can't just focus on this. Heroes multitasks all the time. This is your test, not mine." "Agreed. You should not rely on Midoriya, despite the fact I have a feeling he will do a large portion of the work." Cementos. The elevator closed, leaving a group to ponder the Vigilante's words, and they found it to be right. This was the reality of the hero world. Even when in an important investigation, they still needed to patrol and investigate other cases. This just left them with one thought. However, who is the Batman? And how do they react to him? Do they ask for his help? Or do they try and apprehend him? For their sake, they better decide on this sooner rather than later. A little while later, the rain patted at the windows, but the sound of rain falling was overshadowed by the beat of the music inside the club. Up in the office of the owner sat a young man with makeup and prosthetics, was sitting at his desk doing paperwork when two men came inside his office. As the actor naturally that short or was something done to him for the exam. Denki asked as being that short isn't normal as the only one shorter than him is Mineta and this guy was only a foot taller than Mineta. No, he isn't, Nezu answered. Looking up from his work the young man portraying a much older man spoke using his acting skills to sound somewhat British. What is it you lot want? That's very a good British accent, Kendo praised him. The taller of the two who came in shoved the smaller one to the ground. This is one who decided it was a good idea to put lemonade in the fruit punch owl when we have them both labeled separately. Many laughed at this as they couldn't help but feel amused at the situation the goon was in. The man on the floor squeaked. Two didn't know. Sitting in the chair was the main boss of the nightclub nicknamed the Penguin. He was ruthless, cunning, and able to make deals with the worst. Which are the worst kind? The worst villain isn't someone who is powerful but who is cunning, as those are the hardest to capture. Aizawa spoke as All Might nodded in agreement as his mind went to All for one. He was very cunning but also powerful. Take him to the ice room, the Penguin said coldly while looking at the man strewn about the floor. No, not the ice room, the man pleaded, but his pleas went unheard. The taller man from before picked the other man up and dragged him out of the room kicking and screaming, leaving the Penguin to his work. The Penguin sighed and resumed doing his paperwork, but was once again interrupted when the phone on his desk started ringing. Quirking an eyebrow, the Penguin reached over the answered, "Hello." On the other side came a crazed voice, "Oh Penguin, it's your friend Scarecrow. Those chemicals you promised me were intercepted by the city's vigilante, so if you'd be so kind as to get me more like our partner has instructed, I would be ever so grateful." You have to admit they are doing very well with the acting with the psychopathic voice and Penguin British accent, Momo said, and a lot of people nodded. The Penguin frowned but answered, "Fine, but you better do your part of the bargain, Crane, or I'll tell the boss man all about you now working according to the plan." Crane, also known as Scarecrow, laughed at this. "That won't be a problem, be you friend, after all we gain from this deal of ours. Send the new shipment directly to my lab. I don't have enough chemicals yet for our plan to work just yet, so I need them delivered as fast as possible, even if it's a bit risky." Penguin grunted at this. "All right, I'll send it all to your little chemical plant so it'll be there later tonight." Clapping could be heard as Scarecrow smiled on the other side. "Goody, I can't wait to make my toxin and spread panic and fear. Talk to you another time, Penguin." "Well, this Scarecrow person likes fear from the sounds of it," Iida spoke. With that, Scarecrow hung up, leaving the club owner and secret mob boss to facepalm. "I just had to sign up for this shit, and I have to do freaking paperwork. Why'd I think this was a good idea? Whatever, this paperwork won't do itself, I suppose." The pro-hero sighed at this paperwork as pure evil. The crime boss focused back on his work, unknowing of the multiple figures listening in on him and his colleagues' convention. One of those listening was the recon team from the heroes, which consisted of Setsuna, Toru, Kyoka, and Tokiyami. The other was the Batman who had sent his bat into the air vents to record the criminal's entire conversation, while the Batman himself was across the street perched atop a building with rain pelting his form. Very good, this will allow Izuku to know of the conversation easily without the chance of being caught, as he isn't in the building, and even if they somehow find it he can leave quickly enough. Aizawa praised another groundbreaking underground hero invention as the heroes agreed. "Yes, it is a very useful invention," David spoke with a nod. Izuku noticed the hero team doing their recon a little ways from him and sighed at how obvious they were. Even Toru and Setsuna, who should have been good at spying, were terrible at being discreet and were just barely going unnoticed by the people around them. Toru blushed so hard that you could see it despite her being invisible, and Vlad along with Kendo shook their head in embarrassment. Sighing, Izuku shook his head and tapped his earpiece under his cowl to replay the recording. "All right, I'll send it all to your little chemical plant so it'll be there later tonight." Humming, Izuku used his gauntlet to display the map of Gotham and ran the Batcomputer for references to chemical plants old and new in the Gotham database, and after cross-referencing the new and highly populated chemical plants he found what he was looking for. "Very good, as there is a much higher chance of his using an abandoned chemical plant, as villains tend to use abandoned locations," Aizawa said. Ace Chemicals was shut down a few years ago due to a chemical spill that killed 8 workers. Since then it's been abandoned. Just the right kind of place for criminals to hide in and make all sorts of bioweapons, Izuku commented gravely. He put the coordinate to the chemical plant in his gauntlet and was about to head off but was stopped in his tracks. A voice came from his side. He turned to it. "So you're the Batman. You're tall, dark and broody, but why don't you let me see that face of yours so I can see if I need to add handsomely to that list," said the floating head of Setsuna Tokage, also known as Lizardy. Many girls' eyes began to twitch violently at Setsuna flirting with Izuku. Izuku didn't answer, knowing if he did Kyoka, who was most likely listening, would piece together who he was, but it seemed this was a bad choice as Setsuna grinned. "A good idea, as I will be able to find out who he is from his voice," Kyoka said. "So, want it the hard way then?" "I don't mind, I love a man who plays hard to get," said Setsuna. From behind him Izuku heard a few steps and he jumped to the side to dodge Dark Shadow. He had to sidestep a punch from Toru, who almost slipped on the wet ground of the roof. Izuku could tell he was in trouble but didn't let it show. As he scanned the roof, he saw Toru, Tokiyami, and Setsuna's heads but not her body or Kyoka. So with retreat in mind, he grabbed a smoke pellet and threw it at his feet. The smoke cloud enveloped him almost immediately. A wave of sound came and dispersed the smoke, but by then Izuku had disappeared completely, not only shocking the group but causing Kyoka to shout out. "What the hell? Why didn't I hear where he went in the smoke? So cool vanishing ninja trick," Kota nearly shouted out in amazement as many had nodded in agreement. The group of heroes scanned the area, Setsuna's body floating over time her head as she reassembled herself. "I don't know, do you think it's his quirk?" "No, despite what people think, vanishing like that is possible without a quirk. Extremely hard but possible," Nezu said as Kota's eyes sparkled at the thought of learning how to do that. "Maybe, it wouldn't surprise me if it was," said Toru, who walked over towards Kyoka. Dark Shadow went back to Tokiyami and looked around. "That guy is like us, one with the darkness. A true dweller of the abyss." The raven-head young man nodded to his quirk's words, "Revelry in the dark." Off about 100 feet away from the group stood the Batman, who was hidden in the shadows with his breathing quieted and his heartbeat slower down to go unnoticed. His eyes started at Kyoka and he smiled. "She and the others did well in that surprise attack, but they need to be better to catch me." He took a step back further in the shadows, disappearing from there and heading to his car. A few more streets down he had a chemical plant to hold, and if he was lucky he'd get there before the heroes pieced it all together. The rain continued to pour as the Scarecrow was in his lab and downing his mask, which was heavily torn and stitched back together. He was working while humming a creepy melody to himself. One of his hands was dunked in a barrel of chemicals as he absorbed them to make his toxin, the raw materials being absorbed becoming building blocks for him to craft whatever he wished. He is taking the fear persona to its full potential, especially with him dressing up as a scarecrow, Kirishima said. While his other hand was in a separate barrel that was empty but was getting filled by the sticky green liquid that seeped through and out. This was how he made his fear toxin. "What exactly is this fear toxin?" Iida asked. "It's basically like a hallucinating drug," Nezu explained as simply as he could. By absorbing these raw chemicals he got from the penguin, he got to work making his hallucinogenic drug that induced very vivid nightmares that showed his victims their worst nightmare come to life with no way of knowing it wasn't real. Almost done, and I must say these chemicals are all top-notch. I should give Penguin a picnic basket for doing such a good job in supplying me with good materials." He poured the rest of the fear into the barrel, leaving the other barrels now empty spare for a few drops, and with his work now finished, Scarecrow put a lid on the newly filled barrel to start moving it down with the others. That was until he abruptly heard metal creaking. Turning, and gazing at the dilapidated roof of the chemical plant, he shouted out to his goons, "Hey, keep it down, you imbeciles, I'm trying to work here." A few of their eyes narrowed, mostly the pro-heroes, as they had a feeling something was going to happen. But to his displeasure, he didn't get a response, causing him to glare and start stomping towards the door leading out of the mixing room and out into the center area. "Deku-kun took them out, didn't he?" Uraraka said as the power plant was empty aside from Scarecrow. Looking throughout the building, Scarecrow didn't see a soul in sight, but the hair on the back of his neck started to rise, feeling the sense of something watching him which disputed his observation of the area. "You do have to admit that this is unsettling," Zero said as all the students and some heroes nodded in agreement. I see now, you all want to play a game. Well, I'll find you soon enough and then we can get our work done," Scarecrow said while adjusting the vapor emitter on his right hand just in case it was the hero's and not his guys messing around. He walked past a few barrels filled with his toxin and started tapping on one. Are you in there? Oh, who am I kidding? You'd be dead from fear if you were. Now why don't you come out and? He does like monologuing a bit too much for me, Aizawa said with annoyance as the amount of time that villains kept talking was numerous. Ah, don't worry about him, he's doing well in his role as the villain, Present Mike said with a large smile as Aizawa grunted in response. He was grabbed mid-sentence, making him scream as he was dragged up into the air and held in front of a gargoyle near the ceiling. Without looking at his abductor, Scarecrow shot his gas into the face of the now revealed Batman, who didn't seem to react at all. Many of the students flinched seeing the Scarecrow being suddenly grabbed up out of nowhere and being held upside down by Izuku. Another amazing ninja trick, Denki said with excitement despite the tense atmosphere. And this was answered as when he looked closer through the green gas he saw the lower part of the Batman's face being covered by a sort of rebreathe. Smart, being able to counter a chemical bioweapon even more so it shows he didn't go in without knowing what his enemy had at his disposal, Snipe spoke with approval. Cursing his luck, Scarecrow started to monologue. Now that's not fun at all, so you're the Bat. I must appreciate your intimidating look. From one who loves to make others fear you to another, I must commend your work. Aizawa just sighed at this. The Riddler, where are them and what is your part in their plan? Ordered the Batman with his voice coming out slightly muffled from his gas mask. You do have to admit that with the gas mask, he looks more intimidating as the mask covers the rest of his skin, Juro said as many agreed with her. Scarecrow scoffed at this. Is that all you came to me for? I'm hurt, truly. Here I thought you sought me out for my technique for making others fear, and instead, I got an emo hero wannabe. How disappointing. Izuku's anger flared up, but he channeled it into action, looking at the barrels below, then at the vapor device on his hand, and the mask having a gas filter made him think of an idea. His hand came up and ripped the mask from the villain, causing him to shout, "Hey! I liked that mask. Let's see how you talk after getting a taste of your own medicine," said Izuku with his eyes narrowed. "He's not going to do what I think he is going to do, right?" Momo asked. "If you think that he is going to use his toxin against him, then you probably right," Shoto answered her as Recovery Girl's anger towards Nezu spiked as she was worried what the gas could do to the boy. Pressing on the love caused the gas to blow into Scarecrow's unmasked face, making him cough and quickly start to hallucinate. His heart started pounding as his ears rang, and sweat started to form on his brow. Looking at the thing holding him, he saw a beat that must have come from a horrible nightmare, and in a voice full of anger, full of rage, the monstrous beast spoke. Where is the Riddler? What is he planning? Ah! Many students and even some teachers screamed out in fear from what the Scarecrow was seeing Izuku as. That is a horrifying beast, Toru said with a shiver as many fearfully nodded. Screaming was the only response the monster got, but after squeezing on Scarecrow's neck and releasing a few seconds later, the villain started to spill his knowledge. TTHE guy hasn't told me where he is, but I was supposed to send him some of my fear toxin by tomorrow. Jerking him close in front of him, the monster glared harshly with his glowing eyes. Swear to me. I swear. Kami, I swear I'm telling the truth, so please let me go. Cried out the no-broken villain. Aizawa nodded in approval. He did very well with the interrogation, he said as the heroes couldn't help but agree with him. Izuku continued to glare into his eyes for a few more seconds until he dropped the man, letting him fall. The villain screamed in fright the entire way until he stopped just feet before the ground, having got to the end of the rope he had been attached to and left to hand there. That is terrifying, Iida admitted, seeing Izuku as that monster, and him dropping the fake villain would be horrifying for whoever was on the receiving end of it. The villain had gone unconscious from fright and left to dangle from the rope attached to him with a visible wet spot in between his legs. Izuku, who was still on the gargoyle, tapped his earpiece and contacted his AI. Alfred, send officers to the Ace Chemicals building and make sure they have medical with them, said the emotionless-sounding Vigilante. Many frowned, especially the girls, as seeing this they couldn't help but worry for Izuku. Without waiting for a response, he walked past unconscious thug androids and exited the building after getting the villains down to the floor safely. Even if this was supposed to be realistic, Izuku wouldn't feel right leaving someone to dangle from a rope for a long period of time, and he was in no good state of mind to be doing something like that right now. Many smiled at this but still worried for Izuku. The sound of rain and his footsteps, as he walked to the car, was almost deafening. He was left with the actions he had chosen to do with the consequences that he was to blame for. He may have just traumatized a kid from his school, and for what? His misplaced sense of justice. But then what is justice? What makes him different from those who seek chaos to show how unjust the world is? Is the only difference between him and a villain that he is attending UA? And they didn't. He needs some help, All Might said with a frown, worrying for his successor. These questions were clouding his mind, and he didn't notice how he had driven to the Batcave. It was barely 12:30 and here he was at this base with plenty of time to go out and patrol. Yet even Izuku could tell he wasn't in the best mindset and would be foolish to go out with such a preoccupied mind. He would need to clear his head somehow before even thinking about heading out again. So he did what he usually did when his mind was heavy with thoughts. He called up the only person he could think of who could help him now, and this was none other than his mom, Inko Midoriya. Despite himself, Bakugo couldn't help but smile at the thought of his aunt. *RINKG *ring**re**beep *less than hello. Izuku, do you know what time it is? Shouldn't you be at school right now? Are you okay, sweetie? Do you need me to come get you or something? Greater than. Izuku smiles with his cowl still on, his fingers locked together. I'm here, Mom, and I'm doing good. I just needed to talk. All sorry for waking you. Less than don't be, dear. I'm always here for you. So what's got you worked up? Greater than, came Inko's reassuring but still evidently tired voice. I did something and I'm regretting it, but I also know that I probably need to do it again with the path I've chosen to follow. Izuku came clean to his mom, wanting to hear her thoughts on the matter. Inko paused for a bit to think over her words. Less than. Izuku, tell me this. Did you do what you had to do for the good of others? Greater than. Izuku thought his mother's question over in his head and nodded to himself. In a way I did, yes, but what does that have to do with? He was cut off by his mom. Less than. Young man, your idol used violence to stop other violence for his entire career. If anything you did was on the same level as breaking a man's bones in one punch, then you're fine in your idol's eyes and my eyes as well. Don't make it complicated, Izuku. Just do what you think is right, and I know as usually it'll be the right thing to do since you've always done good for others even without thinking. Greater than. Izuku felt the edges of his lips lift into a smile, and he shook his head to what she just said. Mothers do know what to always say in times like these. Thanks, Mom, I'll let you go back to sleep. Good night. Less than. Good night, Izuku. Stay safe and have a good night. Greater than. Inko hung up shortly after, leaving Izuku with a newly cleared head. Everyone smiled at how his mother had helped Izuku clear his thoughts from what he had done. Thank you, Inko. All Might thought to himself, glad that Izuku's mother had helped clear her son's mind. The young man turned to the Batcomputer and spoke to his AI. Alfred, send Bat to spy on the heroes and tell me if they need help with the riddle. Aye, sir. Bat is on its way as per you've orders. Nodding, Izuku looked through crime reports and headed to the nearest crime scene in the Batmobile, and he'd continue to work throughout the night. In the observation room, Toshinori sighed in relief and let the unease he previously had from watching his protege go completely. He and the others had gotten worried about how Izuku had done with the scarecrow. All Might slowly nodded with himself. He could still hear Chio yelling at Nezu for allowing such substances to be allowed in a testing environment, and that it was an especially stupid idea with how easily it backfired on the poor boy. The said woman went back to glaring at her boss. Nezu didn't react to her glare. But Nezu countered as usual that it was all to make the exam feel more real, and the young man in question signed papers acknowledging that this may happen during the exercise. Toshinori frowned at that, but not for any of the reasons Chio was talking about. No, Toshinori was worried at how his successor had interrogated someone for information. Toshi knew he didn't teach him that, and as cold as Aizawa was, even he wouldn't teach how to interrogate kids just out of middle school. That is true, but no matter how he did it, Problem Child still did well, Aizawa said as many nodded, though others wondered how Izuku learned to interrogate people. This made Toshinori ponder if this was their hero Izuku wanted to be, one of fear and intimidation that just hearing about him would make villains scurry like rats. Aizawa couldn't help but smirk at this, and other heroes did like the idea. Of course, it would be hypocritical to think that way, as his position as the former #1 hero made quite the splash when it came to suppressing crime. He saw this daily in the numbers while reading reports. Those areas All Might would patrol would see lowered crime rates. It was a known fact that criminals were intimidated by him, but Izuku wanted something more, something he couldn't quite describe just yet. Oshi, Toshi, are you listening to me? Called out Gran Torino with a tick mark on his forehead. Gran Torino had a twitching eye at All Might, ignoring him as the said man gulped. Snapping out of his stupor, the retired hero turned to his sensei and replied, "Sorry sir, what were you asking?" Gran scoffed at him. "I wanted to tell you that you shouldn't worry too much about the kid. He's doing well, and if you've forgotten, he's playing a vigilante, so laws don't apply to him. So interrogating some lowlife is right up his alley. Hell, if he held back any more, I'd have to complain that Nezu should dock his points." Excuse me, what do you mean by that, sir?" Shaking his head in disbelief, Gran pointed to a replay of the interrogation. "Just look and you can see the kid thought about dropping him right into those barrels filled with that stuff below them. The drop wasn't far enough to break anything, but the kid was worried about the amount of chemicals that would affect the other id. So I'd say he held back greatly and thought through it all like a professional would, although I would have smacked the guy around a bit, but that's just my opinion." "I wonder what would happen if Izuku did drop him," Shoji said as a few flinched at the idea. He was right, absolutely right. How could he have been so blind? Young Midoriya did everything to his advantage and still didn't go too far in crossing the line. Looking at it in this way, Toshi could see the calculated look his successor had when in hero mode, as he called it. He was in complete control of the situation, and when he thought he had been too rough, he exited his patrol to go and clear his head. All Might smiled and mentally berated himself as the heroes nodded, happy that Izuku went to clear his head once things went down for his mental state. Oh, how much of a fool could he be? Toshinori needed to have more faith in his successor and not crumble at the first sign of something going wrong. He promised Midoriya he'd have faith in him, and he already failed. But no more from here on. Toshinori Yagi will back his student all the way, even when he is against the wall. Even if Midoriya himself feels lost, he'd continue to have faith in him. "You're right, sir. Thanks for pointing this out for me," Toshinori replied with a smile and a firmness in his voice. Rolling his eyes, the older hero looked to the screen of the boy finishing his talk with his mother and leaving the secret base. "Don't mention it. Besides, I've seen you go down the path of righteousness too, you know. And I won't ever top bringing it up, so don't even try topping me." Twitching, the blonde man's eyes closed shut harshly as memories came up in his mind. "I remember, sir, and I still regret going vigilante to try and avenge Nana's memory." All Might flinched and looked down in sadness at the thought of his deceased mentor. There was a long stretch of silence until Gran Torino responded, "Whatever, breath. Let's just get back to watching the kid before that rabbit woman starts trying to barge out of here and hawk your successor again." Sweat dropping at this, Toshinori glanced over to the newly named horny jail corner where Mirko and Midnight had been tied up and gagged. His successor being intimating had turned them on. He wasn't one to judge, but he started wondering if there was something wrong with those women. The said woman blushed highly but wouldn't deny that they would feel horny about something like this, and the people around them shook their heads in amusement. "Yeah, I think my successor is going to be in the hospital with a fractured pelvis by the end of this. Probably, but they who would complain about getting injured in such a way. Ya no, you're not exactly wrong. Why him out of all people? Why can't it be me? I deserve it, not him." Mineta screamed out in sadness as he cried blood. With the heroes in Hero HQ, Kendo rubbed her temples as the daytime heroes came back and were getting ready to rest and had just finished the basic debriefing for the day, and now before the night team, who would be patrolling from 12:30 a.m. to 7:30 a.m. were seated. All right, I've heard enough. Can we please get over the fact that this Batman character can teleport and or become one with the darkness like you all keep saying? Quote. Revelry in the dark. Tokiyami nodded with his future self. Kendo facepalmed from Tokiyami's last little job and spoke while pinching the bridge of her nose. "I'm not going to ignore that and move on to the next matter of business." She turned to the laptop with the Riddler's new riddle on it. This Riddler character seems to be what appears to be Nezu's made UP main opponent for us. It also seems fitting actually that the smartest creature alive would have our test be against someone who will challenge our knowledge and thinking capacity. "Yeah, that is something he would do," Iida said as the students agreed with him. The occupants of the room nodded to this, thinking that the rat god would pull something like this. Even the more brash like Bakugo and Monoma couldn't dispute this. Kendo then turned to the second team. I know you guys encountered the Batman a little after the mayor's incident, but I want to hear from the first group to encounter him if that's alright. Kyoka, Setsuna, Toru, and Tokiyami raised no objections to this, allowing Kendo to question Momo's group. Kriti, tell me about what happened when you arrived on the scene, and don't forget a single detail. Even the smallest can help us in finding the Riddler and or figuring out who the Batman is, ordered the leader. Good job, you're doing fairly well so far as a leader, Kendo, Vlad said as she smiled. Momo stood up from her seat while tapping on her iPad to switch slides on the large TV in the room. She then went on to explain the mayor's home with detailed images to get her points across. After a bit more of telling her story, she got to the Batman and his action in the investigation, from his insight and deductions to his finding of the newest riddle. Once Momo was finished, she sat down, allowing everyone to digest the report and form their ideas on the riddle and the ever-mysterious Batman. Kendo, being the leader, had much more in her head at hearing all of this. This Batman guy has helped us out a lot. It may have taken us hours to get to the garage and even longer if he didn't figure out the clue leading to the garage for us so quickly, thought the red-haired leader. Looking up at the others, Kendo saw that they were waiting on her, so with a deep breath she spoke. Batman has been a major help to us, but he's right, this is our exam, so we can't use him as a crutch. So for those staying back to be backup, we will be deciphering the newest riddle. They all nodded, agreeing to this as the best course of action, but Kendo wasn't done as she turned her attention back to the recon team. Setsuna, what happened with your group? The green-haired girl stayed and sighed. Well, to put it simply, a guy nicknamed Penguin is the owner of the nightclub we looked into and is in cahoots with some other guy calling himself Scarecrow. He's sending this Scarecrow guy chemicals to make something for someone else who is probably Riddler by the sounds of it. Bakugo scoffed at such an obvious thing and a few people gave him the stink eye. Kendo nodded to this and added the Riddler, Scarecrow, and Penguin to the board with the Gotham City map. She then turned back to the girl and asked her to continue, which she did. Earphone Jack used her jacks to listen in and send the audio of their talk to a recorder, so we have evidence of the two's dealings and can make a case against them. But that's not all. Invisible Girl was able to put a tracker on the truck sending the chemicals to Scarecrow's hideout, meaning we can go and bust them too while we're at it. A bit late for that now, Denki commented. Smiling at this good news, the leader of the hero students nodded. Good work, you guys. We can send the raid group in tonight once we catalog the evidence and get a warrant. Now how about your experience with the Batman? What was he like? An amazing badass ninja, Kirishima and Denki shouted out with large smiles. Setsuna rubbed the back of her head sheepishly, which was very unlike the girl Kendo had gotten to know for the past year. Well, Jax noticed him and I confronted him, even flirted a little to catch him off guard, but it didn't work. It seemed to me like he was spying on the Penguin as well and got a recording of what Jack heard from inside his headpiece. Other than that, we tried to apprehend him, but he disappeared in smoke like we said earlier. Now that was news to everyone. Setsuan and her group had been claiming Batman could disappear out of nowhere when they arrived, but didn't get to elaborate as they had to immediately go and start the meeting. But with this new information, they all started to ponder things, one of which was how skilled Batman truly was. To certain raven-haired beauty, she remembered the way his arms felt familiar around her and was wondering if she knew him somehow. The silence of the room dragged in until it was broken by Ibra of Class 1B. I'm sorry to say, but I believe I have some bad news. Of course, they do, Cementos commented lightly. The others turned to her as they saw the vine-haired girl on her phone. With a few taps, Momo's iPad dinged and the heiress quickly tapped on it and switched the TV to show what Ibra sent her. It was the live feed from the Gotham City News channel. What they all saw on screen was a seemingly abandoned Ace Chemicals building with police coming out of the front doors with men in handcuffs. Taiyu tilted her head at this. What's so important about this, Ibarachan? Ibra didn't answer, however, as she let the news anchor explain. A man with brown hair and glasses addressed the camera, speaking to the viewers. This is Jack Ryder here with Gotham News Channel. What is happening behind me is an active crime scene, but the most disturbing news is what dwells inside said building. Inside dwelled a villain who was making a bioweapon here inside our city. He was found by police after a mysterious caller sent them here just under half an hour ago. Well, he nails how reporters act. Emi mentioned as Aizawa's eyes slightly twitched. He despises reporters with a passion. Even if it is for an exam, he still hates them. The group's eyes widened as the police escorted a man lying on an ambulance stretcher, but what caught their eye was the outfit of the man. Clad in makeshift clothes and a brown trench coat was the man, but the most disturbing was the scarecrow-like mask and hat he had accompanying him, which was held by a police officer. "Oh crap, baskets," Pony cursed in surprise. A few people snorted at this. Without looking over, Uraraka replied, "You can say that again." "Oh crap, baskets," Pony repeated. This time many actually laughed at Pony. Jack Ryder spoke as Scarecrow was loaded into an ambulance. The strangest part of this whole thing is the fact police found these criminals already subdued but with no hero in sight. However, when talking to pedestrian, we found that they reported a shadowy creature entering and exiting the building. Could this be the rumored Batman we've heard about in the past months? Or does Gotham have a vampiric uprising in its midst? This is Jack Ryder signing off. Is he a vampire? Asked Denki Kaminari, completely serious. Jiro and others sighed at Denki. "Idiot," Jiro said with a sigh. Yet no one answered or could say otherwise, so Kaminari from then on started to believe this to be the case. A few rolled his eyes at this. With the meeting basically over, the night patrol team was sent out while the daytime patrol team turned in for the night, which allowed the newly formed investigation team to work on the riddle and start setting up a raid on the Penguin soon. The morning was rough for the hero team. Not only was the riddle still not solved, but their plans to take Penguin down were delayed due to the new mayor having them send teams to the general of the old mayor Conroy. Kendo had been pissed but accepted after the mayor said she had jurisdiction over them, and if they wanted to work in her city then they needed to listen to her. So with a pissed off expression, the Karatop teen hung up and addressed the other hero students. "Okay, our plan to raid Penguin will be delayed until later this evening. I want those who wish to volunteer for the mayor's funeral to step forward now so I can send you in a couple of hours while the rest head out to patrol. And this is why I prefer being an underground hero, much less rules that you have to follow, especially in a situation like this." Aizawa said with annoyance in his voice that the mayor's wife was preventing the heroes from stopping the villains. A few said they wanted to patrol while some others stepped up. Of those who stepped up, they were small in number but enough for the funeral in case anything happened or crimes were nearby. So it was decided the ones to attend the funeral were Tsuyu, Tetsu, Kirishima, Shishida, Kodai, Bakugo, and Komori. Leaving the others to patrol for the day, but they weren't able to begin just yet as Kendo's phone rang once more, this time from the police station. The redhead sighed and answered quickly, wanting to get the day started already. "Yes, this is Battle Fist speaking." Shinso's voice came from the other side. "Less than yo, it's Detective Shinso, we had a problem greater than." Kendo sighed as a few people chucked at her misfortune. Kendo groaned inwardly before saying, "Hold on a minute, I'll put you on speaker." Shinso gave a simple, "Sure thing," letting Kendo tap the speaker button, allowing the rest to hear what he had to say. Kendo spoke again, letting him know they could hear him and allowing the purple-haired teen to tell them what was going on. Less than WE have a major problem. The district attorney Adam West didn't return home last NGIHT, and neither did Police Commissioner Loeb, greater than, explained the tired teen. Hearing Kendo address the situation, "Do you know if it was a kidnapping or a murder?" The sound of Shino's sighing could be heard as he responded, "Less than no, it's like they just up and disappeared and we can't track their phones or vehicles. The way things are looking, they may have gotten nabbed by someone smart enough to not get tracked." Greater than. "He is going to be the next victim," Iida said with a frown. Sitting at her part of the table, Kendo rested her face in her hands as she started thinking. Meanwhile, the rest of the two classes present started murmuring to each other about what might have happened. It was a few minutes of this until Kendo came to a decision. "Shinso, I want some officers to check their homes for any clues. If anything is out of place, I want to know about it. I then want you to get someone to take care of directing the police while you go and watch over the mayor's funeral in a couple of hours. Can I trust you to do this?" "Less than sure. I'll get some coffee and be right as rain. See ya guys later," greater than answered Shinso before handing up. Shinso and Aizawa smiled at the thought of coffee, much to the amusement of the others. Kendo pocketed her phone and turned to the funeral team. "You guys rest for now and draw up a plan to have all of the entryways covered and 2 of you watching over the crowd. And for God's sake, act professional and don't get into any trouble with the people who will be at the funeral. The last thing I need is a rich pretty boy nagging the media about one of you blowing up a mourning family member. Everyone looked at either Bakugo or Monoma at this. Bakugo scoffed at hearing this and turned away at the glare he received from the redhead. Kendo had enough on her plate as the leader, and if the media started to get on their ass she'd personally whoop the ass of whoever caused her more trouble. The meeting went as normal after that, allowing the patrolling teams to leave and the backup teams to rest with those who would be bodyguards for the funeral. Time seemed to fly after that, with Kendo getting informed that nothing was found at either the commissioner's home or the district attorney's. As much as this irked her, she had to let the matter go as she couldn't do anything more in the search than she already did. When the clock hit 10 a.m. the funeral team left with a SWAT team that came to pick them up and take them to Gotham City Chapel, and as this all went on Kendo felt something in the pit of her stomach saying something wrong was going to happen, but she couldn't pinpoint what. With the funeral team, Kirishima leaned against the railing looking at the crowd of seated people inside the chapel. He looked through the crowd for anyone suspicious but didn't notice anyone out of the ordinary. He continued to look until his earpiece went off. He quickly answered, "What's up guys?" Tetsu's voice came over the comlink. Less than the outside is clear so far on the north side. The civilians are a bit rowdy but that's about it. What about you guys? Greater than. Bakugo responded a second later, less than nothing over here on the west side either, just extras being extras. Greater than. The hero's instincts couldn't but scream like something was going to happen. The red-headed teen snickered at his friend's banter. Kodai, Su, Shizuto, and Komura saying that they didn't have anything of interest happen on their ends as well. The funeral service was going to start soon as the time was nearing 12:14 p.m. The crowd of stored guests was going to be told to start sitting down and wait for the funeral to start any minute now. From Kirishima's side, the feminine voice of Shinso's partner rang out, "Hey Red Riot, you good over here?" Kirishima turned and greeted the girl with a manly smile. "I'm good, what about you Kiori?" Mineta drooled at the sight of such a hot woman as the girls looked at him in disgust. She sighed and leaned on the railing with him. "I've been better. With how late I was awake last night with all the work we had to do I got little to no sleep. I have no idea how my partner does it." Kirishima nodded to this. From the little interaction he had with the Aizawa look-alike he could tell the guy had some form of insomnia and just worked through his tiredness, which was pretty manly in its way. A few chuckled at this. Right then the crowd was settled down and the event started in full swing. The doors opened, the casket was walked into the chapel being held by androids. Kirishima noted this fact but chalked it up to wanting the androids so as not to drop the casket accidentally or something, and just watched on at the casket being walked over to the podium in the back of the chapel. The casket was set down. The latch stayed close not to show the mangled body he knew was under there. From the photos they were shown, Kirishima guessed it was for the best as an android playing the part of a kid of the mayor who wept for his father. A church bishop approached the podium and started to speak. Kirishima blocked it out as he looked over the crowd, seeing nothing out of the ordinary once again. That was until his earpiece went off. He didn't understand the garbled words and shouts from Suyu, but he could tell it wasn't good. He turned to Kiori, who had her walkie-talkie in hand, and adjusted the dial until she got to the right frequency. *2 reaped vehicle inbound. Shit, a few said, seeing the car going toward the church. Kirishima's eyes went wide as he turned and ran to the other side of the balcony, letting him see the front door. He was just in time to see a black sedan drive through the open doors, clipping them as it did so, and drove down the center aisle of the seated guest and into the casket, barely missing the bishop, who barely jumped out of the way. Pandemonium ensued quickly after as people shouted, shoved, and ran from the sedan. Kirishima didn't hesitate to hop on the railing and landed on the first floor with Kiori following him, and they both made their way through the crowd. The other officers on scene tried to contain the panic, but Kirishima didn't see it working that well, but it didn't bother him as he and Kiori were much more intent on finding out who was driving the sedan and talking them into custody if needed be. Aizawa nodded in approval as he liked police who did their job properly. They finally made it through the crowd when they saw the sedan's door open and out walked a man with his hands up. Kiori whipped her pistol out upon seeing him, and she and Kirishima noticed the most concerning part about the man. There was a strange contraption strapped to his neck and the words, "To the Batman," written on his chest with what they could only assume was blood. "Riddler," Iida growled in distaste. The android who was holding a phone that was strapped to his hand pointed to it as he addressed the two. "He forced me to do it. He he wants to speak to the Batman, please help me. Quote. Shit, cursed out Kodai, who just made it on the scene with the other heroes not far behind. With Izuku, the Batcomputer had an alarm going off that awoke the sleeping young man. Izuku was drowsy as he noticed the alarm and realized what was going on. He rushed out of bed and ran to the computer to see an alert that meant the news had his Vigilante alias as a headline. He looked closely at the screen and saw the Gotham City Chapel with police blockading the street and keeping the press and crowd away. Izuku read the headlines about an attack and the attacker calling out the Batman. His eyes narrowed at this as he rushed over to his armor to get dressed. As he did this, however, he spoke to his AI. Alfred, compile a detailed report on what's happening at Gotham City Chapel and tell it to me. Time for the amazing Batman to show, Denki said with a smile. Do you think Izu bro will make this permanent? Kirishima asked. Quote. I hope so, his friend admitted. Of course sir, just give me a moment. Sir, the chapel had been attacked and is an ongoing hostage situation. The hostage drove into the chapel and had a device attached to his neck. The orchestrator of the attack is unknown for now, but from the details I've analyzed I'd have to point this attack being the work of the Riddler. Izuku mulled this over in his head before agreeing with the AI's assessment. He finished gearing up by putting his cowl on and turned to walk to his gadget wall. He took the usual gadgets he needed and made sure to take his hacking tool in case he needed to disarm the device mentioned in the report. The Batmobile revved up and flew through the tunnels towards the chapel. 15 minutes later he parked a few streets away before using the rooftops to approach the chapel building, the cloudy sky giving him enough darkness to go unnoticed by more people's eyes. His grapple gun shot the chapel's tower and he flew through the air and onto ornate architecture, but one lucky photographer who was looking around took notice of him and got one lucky shot of Izuku before he disappeared into the chapel. You have to admit that is one lucky guy, Uraraka said, and they nodded. Just about every student with some exceptions had stars in their eyes as it looked so cool. The photographer lowered his camera and continued to stare at the spot the Batman had been at just seconds before. His partner took notice and nudged him before he asked, "What's up with you, man?" Without speaking or looking away from the spot on the tower, he showed his camera to his partner. The partner looked at him weirdly before glancing at the camera with the newest picture being shown on it. His eyes widened and he asked audibly, getting some looks from those nearby. The partner grabbed the camera and turned to his friend. "We gotta send this to the station immediately, we've struck gold." "I'd say you struck much higher than gold," Momo said with a smile. The photographer nodded at his friend after being knocked out of his stupor. He quickly sent the photo, which was soon shown on the Gotham City News channel in a matter of minutes. Izuku entered the chapel and skulked through the shadows of the rafters. He looked down upon the hostage and the hero group up on a balcony overlooking the hostage while talking amongst each other. The Batman took quite a notice of the device on the hostage's neck and saw it was a combination lock with welded planting covering the C's, so it probably couldn't be cut through without exploding from a failsafe measure. Nezu smiled at his favorite student's analysis. He narrowed his eyes at this. He also saw the phone in his hand, and Izuku used his hacking device to hack into the phone and track the signal the phone was in contact with. With that done, he decided to contact Shinso. Using his hacking tool again, he took control of the perplexed phone and sent a message. Shinos, who was talking with Bakugo and the SWAT team leader on a course of action, stopped speaking as his phone pinged. He raised an eyebrow at this, knowing he had turned his phone to silent and ready the message anyway. Eyes widened as he looked around, getting the others' attention. Bakugo asked, "What's got you spooked eye bags?" Shinos shot a small glare Bakugo's way before responding, "I got a message from Batman." Bakugo and the other heroes looked at him in surprise, the explosion user being the most vocal. "The fuck do you mean you got a message from Batman?" "I mean I got a message from Izuku. What do you think my future self meant?" Shinso said with annoyance and then ignored the shouting Bakugo. The purple-haired teen sighed. "I mean I got a message from Batman, what else would that mean? Anyways, he says he's here and that the divide is mechanical and needs to be manually unlocked to get the hostage out safely using a 3-digit code. So no, we can't have Kirishima or Tetsu. You can't just grab it with your hands and have it explode without the stage dying." Shinso nodded in agreement with his future self, but everyone aside from Nezu looked interested in the contraption that the hostage was in, and Kirishima looked down a bit embarrassed. Izuku already guessed what he would try and it would have resulted in the hostage's death. The hardening users blushed sheepishly and rubbed their necks in unison upon hearing their idea get shot down. Bakugo was also pissed and looked around the chapel for the bat but couldn't see him anywhere. So where is the fucker? We need him to get Blue's clues to release the hostage. Izuku, who was still in the rafters, sighed at his childhood bully's words. He almost contemplated whether it was better to stay hidden or go and help. A few chuckled as a vein popped in Bakugo's head. Of course, he wouldn't leave the hostage, but the thought of frustrating Bakugo to no end was very appealing, but wasn't like Izuku even in his Batman persona, so he slowly approached the group. Dropping from the veiling using the grappling hook, he landed in front of Shinso and slowly stood up and addressed him, "Detective." Shino's, acting like he didn't just have a mini heart attack, responded in kind, "Batman, it's good to see you again." Shinso and many others jumped at the jump scare Izuku gave them, and Shinso grabbed his beating heart. "Well, he surely is quiet," Shoto said as he looked at the startled people with amusement. Izuku nodded before turning and looking at the words written on the hostage's chest. "The Riddler seems to have a fascination with me, this is concerning." "Oi, extra, listen here, tell us what you—" Bakugo started shouting but was cut off by Batman glaring at him and stopping him dead in his tracks. Everyone flinched at the sight of the soon-to-be famous bat glare, and despite himself Nezu also slightly flinched at the sight of it. Sweat formed on the blonde teen's face as he withered under the glare, while Kirishima and the rest were shocked by this but not as shocked as when Batman completely ignored the blonde and started walking toward the railing. He stopped in front of it and looked at the hostage. It had to be the missing district attorney, but the facial recognition software in his cowl had deduced the same thing. Turning back to the group of heroes, 2 detectives, and the SWAT team leader, he decided to test them. "Do you know the hostage's identity?" The heroes shook their heads no, Bakugo even scoffing but not retorting in any surprising way. Shino's, however, answered with a nod. "I believe it's the district attorney that went missing last night. It's safe to assume the Riddler kidnapped him and did the same with the commissioner." Many nodded. "It is the attorney," Shoto spoke with narrowed eyes. Izuku nodded to his reasoning and turned back in the hostage's direction. "I'm going to approach the hostage now. If you want any of your hard quirk users to come with me, choose quickly." Right after saying this, he hopped the railing and started walking to the district attorney. After landing, he could hear the loud talking back on the balcony, but he didn't care as he had a job to do. When he was almost to the hostage, a slam came from behind him, most likely Kirishima or Tetsu jumping the railing like he did and running towards him. Kirishima slightly chucked at this. Izuku finally arrived in front of the hostage a minute later and looked over. While he did this, Kirishima came to his side and huffed as he had run to him after being thrown off the overlooking balcony by Bakugo. Kirishima addressed the visibly distressed man. "Sir, everything is going to be all right. We'll get you out of this soon." "Good job trying to reassure him, Kiri," Mina said with a smile as he smiled back at his friend. The district attorney scoffed, seemingly ready in denial. "I don't think that's the case. This thing is rigged to blow and I don't have much faith in such crooked individuals." He mainly looked at Izuku as he said the last part. Seemed the attorney didn't like those taking justice into their own hands or going against the law, Izuku noted. Many narrowed their eyes at the man as Izuku was just trying to help him, but they also didn't like his attitude. Batman used his detective vision on the collar device. Like the attorney had mentioned, it was rigged. If it was forcibly opened in any way, then it would blow. That wasn't even the main unlocking mechanism. He frowned at this but wasn't able to say anything as the phone in the attorney's hand started writing with the eye of the caller being the Riddler. Izuku touched his gauntlet to see his hacking tool working on configuring the other caller. With that, he grabbed the arm and brought the phone to him before answering. The phone screen shifted and the image of a background with question marks painted was shown. Then a second later, the riddle was revealed in all his glory. "Well, he surely isn't showing anything at all," Iida said as the Riddler was completely covered head to toe in leather. Aside from the glasses, there were no definable features. The leather-masked man looked at the Batman and spoke in a cheery yet obviously modulated voice. "Less than awe. Goody. We finally meet. As you can see, we are being live-streamed to all of Gotham City. Greater than." Izuku didn't respond to this, trying to mentally note every feature of the man he could see so he could try and find out his identity, but it seemed the Riddle noticed this. "Less than, don't try figuring out who I am just yet, Batman. I have the mask and modulator for a reason. If I wanted to be found out so soon, I'd go around with my name written on my mask. Greater than." A few people rolled their eyes at what the Riddler had said. The armored vigilante didn't respond and instead, Kersham spoke to the villain. What do you want and how do we get the district attorney out of your trap? The Riddler's eyes shifted to the redhead before going to the Batman. Less than I wanted you, Batman. Not some spandex wearing simpleton. Have him take a step back and I will talk. Greater than. Hiroshima wanted to protest, but with a look from Izuku, the redhead shrunk in on himself and took a few steps back from the hostage as ordered. Hiroshima slightly shifted in his seat. Turning back to the phone, Izuku finally spoke. We've done as asked, now tell us how we disarm the caller. Riddler. Riddler laughed at this before explaining. Less than that simple. When I grew up I loved riddles. I used to read and answer them every day with my mother before she passed away. So I want to share that little bit of happiness with you, and I want Mr. West here to answer with your help. For each riddle solved I'll give you a number to the combination lock. So are you ready to play a game, Batman? Greater than. We want to know how to get him out, not your backstory, Momo said, slightly annoyed, wanting to make sure the attorney was safe. Izuku pondered the possible outcomes of this. Most outcomes were bad, but he knew he wasn't in control of the situation. He had no choice but to play the Riddler's game and hopefully get out of it in one piece with the hostage alive. Fine, we'll play your game, Izuku answered after a good few silent seconds. District Attorney Adam West looked horrified but soon also seemed to come to the same conclusion as Izuku. He reluctantly agreed and the caller beeped, indicating the game started with the timer counting down from 2 minutes. Less than first riddle. Ladies and gentlemen, it can be cruel, poetic, or blind. But when it's denied, it's violence you may find. What am I? Greater than, the riddled asked with a maniacal look in his eyes. Mr. West panicked and sputtered, "I don't know." Denki said, looking like he short-circuited as a few rolled their eyes at him. But Izuku answered for him, "Justice, the answer is justice." The attorney copied that answer and the Riddler laughed. Less than that's correct. The first digit of the note is now on screen. Now for you my next riddle. If you are justice, do not lie. What is the price of your blind eye? Greater than. Izuku turned the lock to the first digit and pondered the riddle. While doing so, the attorney didn't get it, but Izuku did. Bribes. He's asked how much for you to overrule a case for someone. All of the pro-heroes narrowed their eyes as they didn't like corrupted officials. The district attorney paled at this. I can't say that. You have to, so unless you want to die, answer truthfully, Izuku said, giving the attorney a glare that made the robot visibly shiver under the intense gaze. Eats around 20,000. Maybe more if it's a high-class client and I know they have the cash. Aizawa growled and the students instantly started to dislike the hostage. The riddled clapped in apparent joy. Less than that's what I wanted to hear. As you can see, Gotham City, the ones you trust to uphold justice, are just as corrupt as the scum in our streets. So how can we trust them when they can turn a blind eye to us, to the people who suffer daily? Greater than. Izuku looked at the timer and saw 30 seconds left. He then discreetly looked at the progress of the tracker of Riddler's IP. Good job, Midoriya, you are doing very well so far, Nezu said with a manic smile on his face as others nodded. It was almost finished at 96%, so with a tense look he turned to the Riddler. What's the next riddle? We're running out of time. Riddler shook his head before stopping and looking Izuku straight in the eyes. Less than fine. The last riddle is this: who is the Batman? Greater than. What? Uraraka and Momo said in surprise. And this is why I hate intelligent villains when they put us in situations like this, Miriko admitted with a glare at the image of the riddled. The district attorney and all those watching were shocked at this turn, but none more than Izuku. This wasn't one of the possibilities he thought of going into this situation, and this wasn't something he was ready to reveal just yet either. The attorney looked up at Izuku and grabbed him roughly. Tell me. Tell me, who are you, quickly. Panicking for a moment, Izuku started to answer. I'm I. He was too late as the riddled spoke condescendingly. Less than and we're out of time. Too bad. This is goodbye, Batman. It was fun while it lasted. Greater than. Do you think he would have said it given a few more seconds? Kendo asked. Yes, the whole Deku squad along with All Might said instantly. Kaboom. Izuku was sent flying, his mind going blank as the head and shockwave hit him directly. He just barely had enough time to cover his face before the explosion went off. Everyone aside from Nezu looked very concerned and hoped that Izuku would be fine. When he hit the ground he skidded and rolled onto his back, but right before losing consciousness, he saw the blurring figures of the heroes and Shinso running over to him. Then, it all went black. The sounds inside the observation room were going in an instant when they saw Izuku get caught in the explosion, his body flying a full 10 feet from the blast center. "Izuku, Midoriya," were the shouts from just about everyone extremely worried about him. Melissa dropped her pen and started to cry. She wasn't alone. Mei, Toshinori, and the new arrivals had all had similar reactions. The new arrivals were Detective Naomasa, the wild pussy cats and the boy Izuku reduced during the summer camp all those months ago, Kota Izumi. Kota, though he was still mostly catatonic seeing his hero being blown back, smiled at that memory and his aunt held him in her arms. Originally upon seeing Izuku's new hero persona, Kota was unsure how to feel, but then seeing him in action he quickly became supportive and started cheering him on. But now after seeing his hero explode, the kid had gone catatonic after that, with his aunt shaking him and trying her best to console him. The women who were crushing on him weren't any better. Melissa's father had gone and tried to tell Melissa that Izuku was fine, but that was not the case. Mei clutched her armrest with trepidation and fear wafting off of the poor girl. She wanted to go see Izuku, but Power Loader's arm kept her in her seat, and no matter the insults she threw at him the teacher wouldn't budge. The said woman frowned at her teacher at this but didn't say anything. The worst, however, was Nimori and Rumi, who had to be restrained and or consoled by the others in the room, all the while Nezu watched the state of the room. He had already dismissed Chio to go heal Izuku and put a pause on the exam for the time being, while waiting on that the rodent turned to the screens showing Batman being wheeled off in an ambulance. "I wish I didn't have to push you so hard, young man, but you did tell me all those months ago that you wished for me to push you to your limits and beyond even those," thought the principal. Aizawa and just about every teacher shot their boss glares, especially All Might. Next to the principal sat Aizawa, who was leaning forward with his hands together, his fingers interlaced as he stared at the live feed from inside the ambulance. "Nezu, how was an explosive that powerful approved?" he asked simply yet firmly, with the others looking in the principal's direction having wanted to ask the same. Aizawa just narrowed his black eyes even more toward his boss but said nothing, knowing future Nezu would answer his question. The rat god continued to look at the screen as he addressed the question. "When Izuku came to me all those months ago he had one request going into the exam." The room was silent, mulling over what Nezu meant. That was until Gran Torino asked, "And what may that be?" "Izuku wanted me to not go easy on him and treat the situation as if I was orchestrating to kill him. I originally denied the request outright, but he said something that made me reconsider." Everyone either raised an eyebrow or was curious, though a few people had to hold down Chio so she wouldn't bash Nezu in with her cane. He paused, gathering his thoughts and causing the others to tense. "He told me that his whole life he was an outcast, a thing people regarded as less significant than trash. Before he met Yagi and came under his teachings he was brainwashed by whom many times people put him down to the point he couldn't see himself becoming a hero while quirkless, even thinking his life wasn't as important as others and still isn't to an extent." Nezu and All Might sighed at this, heeding how bad the treatment for the quirkless is, especially All Might, as he used to be quirkless before Nana gave him one for all. The girls gasped and teared up, some having been crying already cried even harder, with Kota not far behind. "But, what exactly does that have to," Present Mike stated, but was cut off by Melissa. The blonde speaking from experience, "As someone who happens to be quirkless, I can see where he's coming from. My experience isn't that bad due to Iceland being more accepting of people and their quirks or lack thereof, but here in Japan, it's another story. I can't imagine how he was treated, especially with Japan's policy of taking bullying not that seriously as other countries do." Melissa nodded with her future self and others nodded in agreement. Nezu nodded to this. He had looked into the boy's past when Toshinori told him he had found the one to be his successor, when he found was not good in the slightest, and he had been planning to take that wretched school down for what they did to Izuku. Verbal bullying, physical bullying, suicide baiting, no help from his teachers, no friends, and to top it all off his childhood friend was his main tormentor, the very same child of his mother's best friend who stayed by her side when the rest looked at her differently for having a quirkless child. Bakugo slightly flinched at that but didn't otherwise react. And that's without mentioning his father Hisashi Midoriya dying in the line of duty as a fireman when Izuku was only 8 years old. Everyone, especially the girls, frowned sadly for Izuku, feeling bad that he lost his father at such an early age. Nezu nodded solemnly to his thoughts and the blonde girl's statement. He continued where he left off. That is all correct, Miss Shield, but that's not all. He wanted to break out of his mindset that had formed due to years of abuse. He wished to prove to all those who put him down, all those who hurt him and told him he couldn't do it wrong, but most importantly to himself, that he is worthy of being a hero and always had been. Silence. It was completely silent as the room came to terms with Izuku's true reason for being part of the test and what he had done through. Mirko, the rabbit heroine, felt sympathy for the newly formed objective of her affection. She had been bullied for having a weak quirk and had to fight tooth and nail to get where she was today. The thought of those people made Mirko's right eye twitch slightly. She wasn't the only one to be bullied. May had been bullied for being on the autistic spectrum, Nimari for her quirk and mature body she had when she was just a teenager, Aizawa for his insomnia and weak quirk, and Smintos for his looks, with even more in the room having gone through the same sort of treatment. The said people frowned, narrowed their eyes, or had a twitching eye. But it was as they mulled this over that Aizawa thought of something Nezu said. He turned to his employer and inquired about this. When did Midoriya come to you with this idea? Nezu looked up to the ceiling for a moment before answering. It was 8 months ago during your class on discrimination, mainly focused on the quirkless. Quote. Fuck, are his actions connected to that class in some way? The tired hero asked, wishing he was wrong but deep down knew it was mostly likely the case. Aizawa sighed deeply at this and looked down, thinking how one lesson changed so much. Sighing, Nezu gave a small nod. Yes, he explained to me that most of the information was majorly outdated and that answers his classmates gave on the usefulness of quirkless in hazardous situations had upset him by quite a lot. Facepalming, the heroics teacher groaned inwardly, with Miss Joke trying her best to comfort him, but someone in the room was mildly upset hearing what Nezu had said. He came to you for this and not me? Asked Toshinori in a hurt tone. The said hero looked down but didn't say anything, as he knew Nezu probably was a better person to go to with this. Turning around, the principal addressed him. I believe he did this because I could be a neutral party to speak with, and from what he implied I think he chose right to come for me, no offense. Toshinori calmed down but asked, what implications are you speaking of? Nezu wasn't the one to answer this, but instead, the HPSC president was gripping her armrest in anger. It means someone is publishing public knowledge that is completely false, and most likely the work of someone who wants the quirkless population in Japan to suffer more and push their agenda. All of the pro-heroes had anger across their faces, and even David didn't look much better than the heroes. Gran Torino cursed at this. Damn it all, this sounds like the meta liberation all over again, and I would go out a limb and say it's a splinter cell of that organization, or maybe they survived all these years by going underground to gain strength while in hiding. Gran Torino frowned at the thought of that group he thought was taken care of. The retired #1 hero frowned at this, just like a certain quirk thief, and we never noticed, just like with him assuming they were gone. The room's atmosphere darkened more at this. Kota was still crying in his aunt's arms while the rest were sitting and contemplating while they watched the screens. In the Gotham hospital, the Batman was wheeled into an emergency room occupied by Recovery Girl and a few ectoplasm clones. They quickly got to work undressing the teen. The armor was tricky to get off without the knowledge of how it got on, but they made do, with a loud thump of the heavy-plated chest armor dropping to the floor of the emergency room echoed through the room. The gauntlets were next, with the boots and utility belt. The last item was the cowl that was still on him. But when the real ectoplasm grabbed it, he was in for a surprise. Izuku's hand shot out and grabbed the forearm of the hero, squeezing tightly. Holy! Deki shouted, seeing how Izuku had reacted when someone tried to grab his mask, and a few chuckled at his reaction. Midori, relax, it's the teachers, cried out Ectoplasm as the teen's grip was very strong and was actively cracking his bones. Izuku's mind finally started clearing up from working after being blown up, and he released the arm, apologizing as he did so. Sorry, Mr. Ectoplasm. Well, he certainly has good instincts, Snipe said with a light smirk on his face. The multiplying hero rubbed his arm and accepted the apology. It's cool, kid, but how are you feeling? Can you remove your mask because we gotta get you checked out? Izuku froze and turned to Recovery Girl. Will I be disqualified and exempt from continuing the exam if I do? Chio glared at the image of her most visited patient, and everyone looked at him in worry, among other reactions. Chio glared. Are you seriously thinking of going back out there after being caught in an explosion of that size? Yes, he is, Shoto said dryly. Without hesitation, Izuku answered, yes, and technically you haven't seen my face to figure out who I am. You've also gotten my blood to identify me either, so technically I'm still an unidentified vigilante. A lot of people couldn't help but sigh or shake their heads in exasperation. Quote. You're a madman, you know that, right? Commented Ectoplasm dryly. Yes, he is, Chio commented immediately, as a lot of people agreed with her. Izuku didn't bother retorting and looked Chio dead in the eye as he replied to her question. Our career is to go against natural disasters, the scum of society, and so much more. We fight an impossible fight without giving up. We're all a little crazy if we honestly choose to fight against such impossible odds. He's got you there, commented Ectoplasm. Chio glared at the math teacher before turning to Izuku. Did you have medical knowledge in your training for the exam? Izuku responded seriously. Yes, I knew there was a chance I could get hurt, so I studied and practiced in my spare time. At least he isn't as brain-dead as this musclehead over here, Chio said as All Might pouted slightly. Recovery Girl sighed and nodded her head. If you get yourself out of her and back to your base, I'll allow you to continue the exam, but I'm only allowing this under the pretense of you taking your injuries seriously and taking care of them with a medkit. The vigilante nodded and looked at his armor, which wasn't much more than scrap metal after absorbing an explosion point blank. He narrowed his eyes at this, and I left it as there was no use in keeping it with it being all but destroyed. May and Melissa looked down in sadness at the destroyed suit. He checked out the rest of his arm and leg armor and saw they were in similar states, so he decided to leave them as well and only took his utility belt with his gadgets. Good, he only stood the necessities, Aizawa said with a small nod. Leaving him in a tight, sleek black jumpsuit that was breakable yet strong, it went directly under his armor and was now the only thing he was wearing. Thankfully the feet were protected so he didn't need to feel the concrete under his feet. And with that out of the way, Izuku walked to the door, and before he opened it he spoke to the two occupants in the room. Tell Nezu about me continuing the exam. I bet he already knows and has already guessed why, but mainly I want him to know one last important thing. No matter what happens, don't stop the exam. Of all people, you just had to pick a successor that is just like you. Chio nearly yelled at All Might as he tried to defend himself and his successor, but he couldn't find anything. Chio and Ectoplasm's eyes widened at this. Immediately Chio tried to yell at the student who seemed to want to die or irreversibly harm his body. The woman nodded in agreement with her future self. Instead, Izuku spoke before she could get a word out. I can't get through this exam knowing it wasn't taken seriously. I need to know. I need to know that I could have become a hero even without Toshinori or my quirk. Fine, I'll tell him, Chio said with sadness. Izuku nodded before exiting the room. The hallway was filled with civilians, police, and nurses, with a couple of heroes sitting and waiting that upon hearing the door open looked and gasped at seeing him. Fuck, Izuku cursed in his head seeing the heroes get up and the police come over to him, specifically the heroes at the cathedral and Shinso with his partner. Reaching into his utility belt quickly he took out a smoke pelt and threw it at the floor. The smoke cloud dispersed almost instantly and spread into the hallway, blinding everyone. The greenette, however, was just fine as he activated his detective vision under his cowl and moved swiftly through the crowd of people. They didn't even notice him as he exited the hallway and ran through a door leading to a stairwell and, more importantly, the roof. Aizawa nodded as the roofs were a good escape location. Ascending the stairs and reaching the edge of the roof, he took his grappling gun out and shot it at a building across the way. Click. However, nothing but a click was heard. On closer inspection he saw that his grapple gun was damaged and so was his spare. Well shit, Denki said as the others nodded in agreement. I got no choice but to go through the hospital, but dressed like this I'll get caught, but what if? Just about everyone couldn't help but feel curious about what Izuku was thinking. He walked off and back to the roof entrance with an idea in his head. He was very glad he had dyed his hair and had his contacts for his detective vision change his eye color. he planned to steal some clothes and walk out the front door of the hospital if everything worked out well. So cool he is going undercover, Denki said with a smile as others chuckled but wondered if his plan would work. With his plan set, he had his hacking device out, which thankfully wasn't damaged, and looked through the cameras of the hospital. He used the cameras to avoid people and enter the break room, the empty nurses. Inside the room he found a large jacket, jeans, and a backpack. He put his utility belt and cowl inside. With his new disguise on, which he combed his hair to make it straight and used a makeup kit to cover his freckles before heading out and walking the halls, he walked right past the heroes and police easily enough with only a few glances but nothing more. Revelry in the dark, Tokiyami spoke, seeing how easily he snuck past everyone. Yet right when he was about to go through the doors to his freedom, he was stopped. He turned to the person and saw that it was a nurse in a white jacket and glasses. He spoke to the nurse using his best acting skills and adjusting his voice slightly to be deeper and more masculine to not be recognized. "Yes, can I help you, miss?" The female nurse blushed and twiddled a strand of hair. "She was wondering if you were new here." Many girls frowned or glared in jealousy at the girl who asked. "There, Izuku out?" Izuku nodded. "Yeah, I just needed to get a bandage for a cut I got at where I'm working for the exam, nothing too major." "Ooh, cool. I was wondering if you'd like to get a medal with me." "You don't have to. I was just thinking it'd be nice to go with someone to lunch while I'm on break," she said shyly and with a blush. Izuku looked at the girl in surprise before seeing the heroes start coming in his direction. He was forced to accept not to be around them, and he noticed. "Sure, got a place in mind." "Lucky," many girls mumbled. "You lucky bastard," Mineta once again yelled out but was hit in the head by Miriko. The girl beamed as she all but dragged him out the door into a place Izuku had no idea about, talking all the while about the type of food they served and how close it was to the hospital. Thankfully they left before the heroes arrived where they were, but unluckily for Izuku he had just accepted a date to not blow his cover, which if anyone knew him, then they would know he had never, ever been on a date before. He honestly worried if he would mess it up or not, or that his cover would be blown by a slip of the tongue. But most of all, he worried he would lead the girl on. She was way too cute for that, sorta like Ochako but more shy. After they left, the heroes arrived at the front of the hospital and spoke to each other about the Batman escaping under their noses once again, not knowing they had just missed him not even seconds ago. In the observation room, they all sweat dropped with the girls minus Miss Joke quickly turning jealous at the lucky girl getting a date with Izuku by pure luck. Toshinori dabbed his eye with a handkerchief. "They grow up so fast." Toshinori nodded in agreement with his future self and felt proud of how quickly he got a girl. Snipe nodded to this. "Yeah, and he wasn't even trying and almost immediately got with a girl due to his looks. I'm starting to believe he was the mask to not get women flocking to his door instead of hiding his identity for the exam." He glanced at the girls saying how unfair it all was. Snipe doubled down on his theory. "Yup, definitely wears the mask for that reason." In the theater, many of the girls were also saying similar things and had an aura of supreme jealousy that she got a date with Izuku. Over on the other side of the room, Nezu was cackling. The request to not intervene if anything happened was concerning but was also a challenge by how Izuku purposefully worded it. If he wanted it this way, then he'd have it this way. After all, he already signed the consent sheet, so if he wanted seriously he'd get serious. Sure, Chio may kill him and he'd have to evacuate most of the students, but who was going to stop him? Definitely not some old lady who had a strange shaped cane. "Oh, you want to taste my cane now, do you?" Chio growled dangerously and was ready to hit her boss before Aizawa and Snipe forced her back into her chair. Recovery girl, who was on her way back to the observation room, felt a shiver go down her spine and she gripped her cane harshly. "Why do I feel like skinning a certain rat?" With Izuku, the Batman was sitting at an American-style dinner by the name of Joey's Burgers, or well, he would have if he still had his suit on, but instead he was in his undersuit layer. In other words, a skin-tight suit with a jacket and a somewhat decent pair of paints. Melissa smiled at the thought of burgers, as anyone who has had an American-style burger will admit that they are delicious. He sighed internally but didn't dwell on the loss of his suit. He had a backup just in case, even if it was a prototype and wasn't as armored as the main suit he finished on. "SSO, I never got your name." "Ooh, wait, I didn't get to say my name either, did I?" Oh well, I guess now is a good enough time as any. I'm Yahiko Hanzo of the business course and currently working as a nurse in the exam," said the glasses-wearing girl in hospital scrubs and a large coat over it. Why first he gets about every girl in the school after him. Now he has such a hot babe on a date with him, Mineta cried out, though this time Ryaku threw him into a wall as he was knocked out for a little while. Izuku nodded and gave out an alias for now. "Nice to meet you, Hanzo-chan, I'm Bruce Wayne." Secret identity, a good idea, Snipe said with a smile on his face. Yahiko blushed and nodded back while taking a sip of her drink. They had already ordered and were now sitting down at a table waiting for their food to be made. "So, what's up with the Batman, am I right?" The awkward girl tried saying to hopefully break the awkward tension. It didn't work. Izuku remembered how his incident with the Riddler was streamed live and he connected that she was talking about that. "I don't know, the guy seems weird to me. I mean, if you're so skilled to be a vigilante, then why not become a hero? It just doesn't make sense to me." A few chuckled about how he was talking about himself. Yahiko smiled wide and cheerfully spoke, "That's why I'm saying. Mainly the using his skills to become a hero part. But the other nurses think I'm weird for thinking like that." Her tone turned saddened at the end and Izuku caught it. His analytical eyes roamed her for details as she sipped on her soda. The girl seemed around his age. Her glasses were prescription, not for style, and her sweaty pals and a nervous twitch in her eyes indicated she was panicking, and that in turn also indicated she was not used to talking to people for being on dates. This is also supported by how she said, "the other nurses," as if she's disassociating from them unconsciously. Nezu sighed, and a few frowned at that. This can all mean a couple of different things, so he prods her for more clues. "Say, Yahiko, hold on, is it alright if I can call you that?" The short-haired girl blushed completely red before stammering a response, "Sure." Izuku noted her blush and breath picking up. "What's your quirk if it's not too much to ask?" Izuku noted her blush and breath picking up when he asked that. Almost immediately she stopped and looked down at her legs, her hands clutching her scrubs. I'm quirkless." "Well, I'm sure he will stay friends with her as young Midoriya spent most of his life quirkless," All Might said with a smile. Bingo, he could recognize that behavior anywhere. After all, he saw it every day for years until he met All Might, and even then it took a long time to get better. The girl's eyes watered and became teary-eyed. "It's alright if you want me to leave, so I'll just..." She tried getting up, but Izuku grabbed her wrist and sat her down. She looked up at him surprised and with a small amount of fear. Many of the students frowned at this, wondering just what hell quirkless are forced to live in. Izuku, however, contrary to whatever she thought he'd say or do, did something surprising. He smiled at her. "Funny enough, I was misdiagnosed quirkless when I was younger. It only came in about a year ago, so there's no need to be fearful, Yahiko-chan. I understand where you're coming from very well and won't hurt or judge you." Yahiko's eyes widened as she stared at him in shock. She even missed when their food was called and Izuku went and retrieved it. By the time she came back to her senses, Izuku was waving a fry under her nose to try and get back to the land of the living. "You all right there, Yahiko-chan?" Izuku asked with a soft smile. The quirkless girl nodded and grabbed the fry offered to her and ate it. She blushed once again as she wiped the tears from her eyes and smiled gently in return. "Thank you, Bruce." Many heroes, but especially All Might, smiled at this. Izuku understood why she was acting so strange. It's not easy being different from others, but when you meet someone like you for the first time, or someone who knows what it's like to be like you, it's a miracle to have someone to relate to. They continued to eat and talk, Izuku letting her in on some of his real-life experiences while Yahiko did the same. It was sorta surreal for the both of them. After it was all done, however, Izuku gave her his number and waved while promising to talk after the exam. They soon parted and Izuku made his way to the Batmobile that was still hidden. He retrieved it easily enough and returned to the Batcave by 2:15 p.m. and got to bandaging his injuries as promised, taking some painkillers to help with the aches of the body. Chio nodded, thankful he would take care of his body. But he still had to do a couple of things before taking a nap to help give him some much-needed rest. He needed to set an alarm for the Penguin raid at 7:48 p.m. and most importantly he needed to check and see where the Riddler's location was from the phone call tracing. Izuku walked to the Batcomputer and typed some of its keys, logging into it and searching for the information. His eyes scanned the screen and he narrowed them upon seeing where the Riddler was stationed at. He's at the abandoned Catholic orphanage that shut down a few years back. Says here that the seawall had cracked and flooded the whole area. The place is based deserted, making it the best for not being found and going unnoticed by cops and civilians alike. The vigilante rested his hand on his bandaged chest and looked at the screen. Why does this feel like a trap? Because it is a trap, Aizawa said bluntly. He couldn't help but feel this was one more riddle he needed to solve, and yet he didn't know why he felt this. Call it a gut feeling, but he didn't trust the outcome of this if he caught the Riddler. Though with that he set the alarm for that day and walked away from the computer, and glancing at a similar to the one that had his original costume, he looked upon it for a few moments before walking back to his bed and going to sleep. To be continued. I hope you guys enjoyed this video and make sure to like and subscribe to the channel. Now we will see you in the next video.